Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Savannah Greywind. Savannah Greywind was born on August 9, 1995, in Burke County, North Dakota. Savannah had two brothers, Joe and Casey, and a younger sister, Kayla. Her parents, Norberta and Joe, took great pride in their children. The family resided in Fargo, North Dakota, until Savannah was 9 years old, then relocated to the Spirit Lake Reservation in 2005. Growing up on the Spirit Lake Reservation, a Native American community in eastern North Dakota, Savannah developed a deep appreciation for nature and animals, particularly horses. It was there that she met Ashton Matheny when she was 15 years old, and they have remained together ever since. When it was time for Savannah and Ashton to pursue higher education, the family moved back to Fargo. Savannah secured a job at a nursing home caring for the elderly, began studying to become a nurse, and was preparing to take her certification exam in September. At this point in her life, Savannah was a happy young woman expecting her first child. She and Ashton had found an apartment, paid a deposit, and planned to move into their own home in early September. Meanwhile, Savannah was living with her parents in a basement apartment of a 7-unit, 3-story building. Unbeknownst to her, Brooke Cruz, 38, and William Hone, 33, rented an apartment on the 3rd floor of the same building. Brooke Lynn Crew grew up in a neighborhood in Bradenton, Sarasota, Florida. Her parents divorced when she was young, leaving Brooke and her 6 siblings to live with their mother. According to her sister, the family had a relatively comfortable life. Brooke underwent significant changes during her teenage years, transforming from a caring girl to a troubled teen. She was shuffled between foster homes, losing contact with her siblings. Brooke was imprisoned in Missouri in 2002 for falsifying documents, then arrested again for parole violation in Texas. She married Carl Crew, a carpenter from Minnesota, at 27, had 2 more children, and worked as an administrative assistant. The marriage ended in divorce in 2009, with the father granted custody of the children. Brooke kept diaries throughout her life, recording tumultuous relationships and self-doubt. Brooke believed Carl had emotionally traumatized her through bullying and belittling. Despite this, she took steps to move forward, studying psychology and joining a dating site, where she met Andrew Murray, a chef from Australia. She relocated to Australia in late 2011. In January 2012, Brooke had an argument with her ex-husband over child custody. The situation escalated, and Brooke allegedly attacked him with a knife, leading to her arrest. She fled to Australia using false documents and married Andrew, but their 6-month marriage ended when he discovered her past. After returning to the U.S., Brooke was involved in a custody battle for her children. She then met William Hone, a 28-year-old convicted of child abuse, and fell in love with him despite his concerning past. Brooke began taking steps towards a fresh start, including finding a job in 2013. Brooke turned her hobby into a profession by studying psychology at Minnesota State University. She developed a particular interest in the psychology of serial killers and wrote a well-received paper. However, her personal life struggled due to a codependent relationship with William, marked by excessive drinking and substance abuse. Despite her outward success, Brooke's mental health deteriorated, leading to withdrawal, strained relationships at work, and a job change. Her obsession with dark human psychology exacerbated her emotional turmoil. The situation culminated on December 23, 2014, when Brooke lost custody of her children and was hospitalized for a panic attack, receiving a PTSD diagnosis. In 2015, Brooke wrote about feeling drained in her relationship with William Hahn. She felt he no longer made an effort to be intimate, and their moments together were brief and unsatisfying. As time passed, Brooke became withdrawn and isolated, exacerbated by a gallbladder disease diagnosis. The situation escalated in 2016 when William brutally beat her, pleaded guilty to assault, and was ordered to stay away. The relationship had deteriorated to the point where there were no longer any healthy moments. A major issue was that Brooke had become unable to have children following an abortion in 2011. Despite this, her partner William continually pressured her to have a child. In an attempt to keep him from leaving, Brooke lied about being pregnant in early 2017, even going so far as to email him a fake ultrasound picture and a photo of a positive pregnancy test. To further convince William, Brooke found a recording of a random baby's heartbeat online and presented it as the heartbeat of their unborn child. However, by August 2017, it became clear that Brooke was not pregnant. William, having already announced the pregnancy to those around him, was unwilling to admit the truth and instead demanded that Brooke produce a child. With her medical knowledge, Brooke began compiling a list of items needed to induce labor, driven by her desire to appease William's demands. On a Saturday afternoon in August, Brooke visited Savannah at her downstairs apartment and offered her $20 to model a dress Brooke was supposedly making. Savannah agreed and, before heading upstairs to Brooke's apartment, ordered a pizza, expecting to eat it when she returned home an hour later. She had to drive her younger brother to work later that day. However, Savannah failed to return on time. Her brother went to Brooke's apartment around 2:30 p.m. and heard the sound of a sewing machine, but no one answered the door. A few minutes later, Savannah's father, Joe, also visited Brooke's apartment and knocked on the door. Brooke shouted that they were still working on the dress and that Savannah was trying it on, which was why she couldn't answer the door. As Savannah's mother, Norberta, returned home, she drove her son to work herself. She found the pizza untouched and tried to contact Savannah by text, but received no response. Norberta then visited Brooke's apartment, looking for her daughter. She noticed that Savannah's shoes, purse, car keys, and belongings were still in the apartment. Given Savannah's pregnancy and related discomfort, it was unlikely she would go for a walk. Norberta called Ashton, hoping he might have picked up Savannah, but he said he hadn't heard from her either. Later that day, the police searched Brooke and William's apartment, as it was Savannah's last known location. The landlord allowed them in and did not obstruct their search. However, since they didn't have a warrant, the police did not search closets or behind closed doors. The police department explained to the family that Savannah was an adult and capable of making her own decisions without informing her family. With no evidence of a crime having occurred in or near the home, investigators concluded that Savannah had left voluntarily. The family was upset by the police department's indifferent attitude towards the case. The police conducted 2 more searches of the apartment but found nothing. However, William would later admit that during one of the searches, he hid the baby in a suitcase and Savannah's body in a dresser with the shelves removed. 2 days after the murder, they disposed of the dresser containing Savannah's body by dumping it into the river from a bridge. On August 23, 2017, William's co-workers informed the police that he had mentioned having a baby at home. That same day, neighbors of the apartment building reported hearing a baby crying from apartment number 5 and immediately contacted the police. With this new information, the officers obtained a warrant and returned to the apartment for a more thorough search, during which they found a live newborn baby girl. Brooke revealed that Savannah herself had secretly given her the baby just 2 days after Savannah's disappearance. According to Brooke, Savannah had previously expressed that she did not want the baby. In fact, Savannah had visited Brooke earlier to ask how she could induce labor on her own. Then, in the early hours of the morning 2 days later, Savannah showed up at Brooke's doorstep with the baby and handed him over. Savannah was reported missing, and the baby was taken into temporary custody by Cass County Social Services. A DNA test later confirmed the baby's parentage, and he was reunited with his father for a short period. 8 days after her disappearance, a fisherman discovered a body wrapped in plastic on the Red River near Harwood. The body was identified as Savannah's through a tattoo on her leg that read, "Too beautiful for Earth." Subsequently, Brooke, Crew, and William were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to kidnap, and providing false information to the police. They eventually began to confess to their crimes. Brooke initiated a physical altercation with Savannah, who was pregnant, by accusing her of stealing and mistreating her cat. The confrontation escalated into a physical scuffle, during which Brooke pushed Savannah, causing her to hit her head on the bathroom sink and lose consciousness. Brooke then used a knife to make a cut from hip to hip, intentionally harming Savannah and her unborn baby. Savannah repeatedly lost and regained consciousness while Brooke did this. When questioned, Brooke admitted that William was not aware of the impending plan. According to Brooke, William came home, entered the bathroom, and saw Savannah's injured body. He asked if Savannah was alive, and Brooke replied that she didn't know. William then left the bathroom briefly and returned with a rope, which he used to strangle Savannah, ensuring her death. After the murder, Brooke and William cleaned the bathroom, scrubbing the floor and walls, and hid Savannah's body in a bathroom closet. When police officers arrived at the door, Brooke attempted to remain calm and composed. The officers searched the apartment but, lacking a search warrant, were unable to thoroughly inspect the premises, including closets and dressers. As a result, they did not find Savannah's body. The perpetrator stated that the child was lying under a blanket on their bed, next to William, during the searches that day. The child was calm and didn't cry, which is why they weren't discovered. However, by the third inspection on August 20th, the body had been moved and hidden in a dresser. Meanwhile, the infant was concealed in a suitcase. On the early morning of August 21st, the dresser was carried down the stairs, loaded into a Jeep Cherokee, and driven to a river, where it was disposed of. William denied participating in the crime but admitted to hiding the newborn baby girl and providing false information to law enforcement to cover up the crime. Brooke and William were set a $2 million bail, which William found unreasonable and unrealistic. Brooke Crew received a life sentence without parole. During the trial, William's involvement in the crime was not proven. However, Brooke's cellmate, Jennifer Robinson, testified against Brooke. According to Jennifer, Brooke claimed to have strangled Savannah with a rope after learning about Savannah's affair with William and suspecting that Savannah's child might be William's. On September 28, 2018, a jury acquitted William of conspiracy to commit murder. Nevertheless, on October 30th, 2018, William was sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping, having pleaded guilty to the charge. The following spring, in May 2019, William appealed to the Supreme Court. After a sentencing review trial on October 7, 2019, Judge Olin stated that despite the Supreme Court's dissent, he would still impose the harshest possible sentence, which was 20 years in prison. Considering that William had already spent 775 days behind bars, he will have to serve more than 7 additional years of his 20-year sentence. Norberta believes her daughter Savannah's disappearance wasn't taken seriously because she's Native American. This sparked Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp to introduce Savannah's Law, signed in October 2020, to address violence against Native American women by improving collaboration between authorities. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan was born in 1987 in Guangzhou, China, a major city and former capital. She came from a relatively affluent family, and her parents provided her with the best possible education, fostering her talents and potential. Wang Nan excelled academically, particularly in the sciences. After completing her secondary education, she enrolled in a prestigious university, studying business and Finances fundamentals while mastering multiple foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she established herself as a valuable, responsible, and highly motivated employee. Her career progressed rapidly, and she was soon assigned to Thailand to lead and develop a new branch. One man was a high-achieving manager at a travel agency, but she left to pursue her own business venture. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which quickly grew into a popular chain under her leadership. As a successful entrepreneur, Wong effectively managed and expanded her business. However, her professional success came at the cost of her personal life. Her last romantic relationship was during her university days, and once she started working, she had no time for dating due to her demanding schedule. Wong, nearing her 30th birthday, wasn't worried about her solitary life, consumed by her business. To improve her Thai skills, she enrolled in courses at a training center. There, she met Yu, who caught her attention by staring before approaching her in Thai. They briefly conversed, and Yu asked why she was studying Thai. Wong replied it was essential for her business growth. Yu proposed that they exchange business cards so they could arrange to meet again. As a courtesy, Wong gave him her card, and he gave her his in return. According to his card, Yu was involved in the export-import trade in Bangkok, but this information didn't make a significant impression on Wong, who simply put the card in her purse and forgot about it. In contrast, Yu seemed truly interested and followed up by calling Wong the very next day. However, she was too preoccupied with work at that time and politely turned down his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, the situation recurred. Wong declined another date, citing her busy schedule and preparations for a business conference where she aimed to expand her professional network. However, Yu appeared at the event, bearing a lavish bouquet of flowers. He waited for Wong to become available, then approached her and asked her out again. Wong was won over by Yu's persistence, as no one had ever pursued her so fervently. She agreed to dinner, marking the beginning of an unexpected romance. Yu fell deeply in love with Wong, showering her with attention, surprises, and gifts. He sent flowers and sweet notes every morning and called her twice a day. Wong's feelings were mixed, irritated by his intensity but flattered by his efforts. She found herself in a romantic relationship again, swept up by his wooing. Wong Man was thrilled to discover that Yu shared her passions and hobbies. To win her heart, Yu made an effort to learn how to cook her favorite meals and surprised her with tickets to thrilling events. Not only was Yu charming, but he was also very supportive, always willing to lend a hand whenever Wong Nan needed it, whether at work or at home. Wong Man felt like she was on cloud nine, but one thing bothered her. After just a few months of dating, Yu was already talking about getting married and even suggesting names for their future kids. Wong Man was taken aback by Yu's eagerness, but he justified it by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and it was time to start a family. Wong Man was unsure how to respond, feeling uncertain about Yu's suitability as a life partner. After a heart-to-heart conversation, where Wong Nan expressed her doubts, Yu vowed to prove his love. That night, he sent her a heartfelt letter, reaffirming his commitment to being a devoted husband and father. In the morning, Wong found Yu waiting on her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers. He proclaimed his serious intentions and readiness to marry her immediately. Wong Man joked that the courthouse wouldn't be open for another hour and a half. However, Yu suggested going there right away, and if it was open, they would register their marriage on the spot. Wong agreed, confident that the courthouse would be closed. But to her surprise, they found it open, and the officer was already at his desk, ready to register their marriage registration. It was revealed that Yu had made prior arrangements, requesting a special exception to formalize their marriage early in the morning. The wedding was unusual, with no guests, rings, wedding dress, or photos. Wong couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't real, especially since she hadn't introduced Yu to her mother, with whom she was very close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate. Wong and Yu had a troubled family life. Wong regretted her marriage almost immediately after it was registered. Initially, she had hoped that you would be a good husband and a reliable partner. However, her hopes were soon dashed as you revealed his true nature. He spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money, and contributing nothing to the household income. When Wang asked him why he didn't work, you claimed that his business was experiencing a seasonal downturn and that he could take a break. However, this downturn had been ongoing for an extended period, prompting Wang to investigate her husband's business. She discovered that his supposed export-import business was merely a facade, existing only on paper and business cards. At that moment, Wang realized the gravity of her mistake in not creating a prenuptial agreement. This meant her husband, Yu, had the freedom to spend her earnings as he pleased and could claim her property in the event of a divorce. They had a heart-to-heart conversation, during which Yu broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find employment. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for a job and was content to rely on his wife's financial support. Yu, a grown man, regularly behaved immaturely, devoting most of his time to playing computer games. On the rare occasions when he helped with household chores or assisted his wife at their restaurant, he would request money from her for personal expenses. Wang eventually reached her limit and informed you she wouldn't give him any more money until he secured employment. The next day, following this conversation, you vanished, taking their marriage certificate and Wang's identity card with him. It wasn't until the evening, when Wang received a call from her accountant inquiring about a large sum of money transferred from her account, that she realized the item were missing. She was shocked, as she hadn't authorized any transfers, but she immediately suspected you. The transferred amount exceeded $500,000, which you had moved into his personal account by providing the bank with their marriage certificate, Wang's documents, and a claim that the money was jointly managed. Wang immediately reported the theft to the police, and her husband, Yu, was tracked down a few hours later when he tried to withdraw some of the stolen funds. Yu broke down in tears and begged for his wife's forgiveness, revealing that he had accumulated a large debt due to his gambling addiction and was being threatened. It was also revealed that Yu had a previous run-in with the law, having served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in China. Wang was both shocked and ashamed, realizing she was not as familiar with her husband as she had thought. Despite this, she viewed gambling as an illness and felt driven to support her husband in overcoming his addiction and resuming a normal life. Wang not only agreed to pay off half of Yu's debt but also offered him a job as a manager at one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu seemed grateful and took his new role seriously, even devising a successful strategy for the restaurant's development. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived, and he soon began spending more time playing computer games and engaging in other leisure activities. During that time, Wang found out she was pregnant and told her husband, Yu. However, he reacted strangely and aggressively, saying he wasn't ready for a child and wanted her to have an abortion. Wang refused, and Yu threatened to divorce her and divide their property through the court. He didn't speak to her for several days, but then apologized and changed his behavior. Yu explained that he had said hurtful things in the heat of the moment, but was actually happy about the pregnancy. He started showing care and helping out around the house again. 2 months later, Wang was happy because her marriage had improved, and Yu was being attentive and responsible. He was preparing their home for the arrival of the baby and doing his job as a manager. One day, Yu suggested getting life and health insurance for Wang because of her pregnancy, to protect her and the baby in case of unexpected events. Wang agreed and wondered why she hadn't thought of it earlier. They got the insurance the next day, and a couple of weeks later, Yu suggested taking a vacation to relax and unwind. Wang was initially hesitant about taking a trip, but her husband persuaded her by pointing out that they had never had a honeymoon and would soon be too busy with their baby to travel. He also emphasized that they needed a break to clear their minds after a tough period. Eventually, Wang agreed to the trip. Her husband took charge of planning the trip, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities to ensure a balance of excitement, education, and relaxation, given Wang's pregnancy. Wang was happy to let him handle everything and was pleased to see how enthusiastic he was about their vacation. On June 7th, they arrived at the park and spent the day exploring, taking in the beautiful views and sights. As it was a summer Friday evening, the park was crowded with visitors. As the evening wore on, Wang noticed that her husband was becoming increasingly agitated and nervous. When she asked if everything was okay, he replied that the large crowds of tourists were ruining their chances of a peaceful and private sunset viewing. Wan Nan eventually agreed that it would be romantic to watch the sunset, as the park would become less crowded as the sun dipped below the horizon. Yu climbed over the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, telling her about the breathtaking view. However, Wang refused to join him, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu became angry but returned to her after a few minutes. He suggested that they should come back to the park to watch the sunrise instead. Since they returned to their hotel well past midnight, they decided to sleep in on Saturday and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. On Sunday, June 9th, a couple, Yu and Wang, visited the national park to watch the sunrise. They woke up at 3 a.m. and arrived at the park while it was still dark, finding the area mostly deserted. From an observation deck, they admired the dawn. Afterwards, Yu went down to a cliff and encouraged Wang to join him to see the rock paintings. Wang was hesitant, but Yu assured her it was safe and promised to help her down and then climb back up. She trusted him and cautiously approached the cliff. The view was breathtaking. Yu hugged Wang and asked if she had any regrets in life. She replied confidently that she didn't. Yu then ran his hand through her hair, kissed her cheek, and leaned in to whisper, "Die." He loosened his grip and pushed Wang down the cliff. He checked to ensure no one was watching, looked down but couldn't see where she had fallen. There was only silence, indicating no one had seen or heard anything. Yu walked calmly towards the park exit, intending to report the incident only after Wang was surely dead. However, a few hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang's body on the rocks and quickly called for rescue. As Yu left the reserve, several emergency vehicles with flashing lights and sirens sped past him. Realizing what was happening, he returned to the scene where his wife had fallen. Upon his return, Yu put on a dramatic display of grief, crying and screaming for help. Convinced that Wang was already dead, he thought no one would uncover the truth. But, as it turned out, Wang's fall was cushioned by tree branches, bushes, and rocks, which slowed her descent and saved her life, as well as the life of her unborn child. Though she suffered serious injuries, Wang suddenly opened her eyes and attempted to speak. Her husband's initial horror was evident to everyone present, but he quickly regained composure, leaned in close to Wang, and whispered in Chinese that she should remain silent if she wanted to live. Wang suffered severe injuries, including head trauma, multiple fractures, internal organ damage, and significant blood loss. Her spine was also badly damaged, leading doctors to worry that she might never walk again. She spent several days in a coma, during which her husband, Yu, stayed by her side. However, whenever he was alone with her, he thought about how to end her life without arousing suspicion. When Wang regained consciousness, Yu was extremely nervous, fearing she would reveal the truth to the police. He refused to leave her alone, even for a moment. Whenever he had the opportunity, he threatened her, claiming he had nothing to lose. Initially, Wang corroborated Yu's account, attributing her fall to dizziness. However, when Yu briefly left her side, Wang asked a nurse to call the police and prevent Yu from re-entering the room. It was then that she revealed the shocking truth, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu burst into the room, claiming his wife was insane due to a head injury and that he would never hurt her or the baby. However, his words lacked conviction, and he was taken into custody at the hospital that same day. He faced multiple charges, including attempted murder and intimidation, for trying to silence his wife. Initially, Wong had hoped to save her pregnancy, as the baby had survived the fall. However, the doctors advised an abortion due to the strong painkillers, multiple surgeries under general anesthesia, and the need for antibiotics. They prioritized Wong's life, as the fetus would likely not survive the effects of the medication. This news was devastating for Wong, but she followed the doctor's advice. Yu consistently denied his guilt and maintained that the event was an accident. In prison, he remained calm and hired skilled lawyers, confident that he could avoid or minimize punishment. Investigators and the prosecutor were convinced that he committed the crime out of self-interest, seeking a substantial insurance payout and his wife's significant fortune of nearly $2.5 million. However, during one interrogation, Yu stunned everyone by revealing another motive for his heinous act. He harbored resentment towards his wife, Wong, for agreeing to only pay off half of his debt, which he accumulated due to his gambling addiction. Yu believed that if his wife truly loved him, she would have covered all of his debts, given her financial means. He concluded that Wong did not love him and felt justified in punishing her. In March 2021, Yu was convicted and received a life sentence. However, Song and his lawyers submitted multiple appeals. 6 months later, the Thai court reduced the sentence to 33 years in prison, showing unusual leniency. Wong and her loved ones were shocked, arguing that such a light sentence would set a bad precedent and potentially encourage others to commit similar horrific crimes. In Yu's case, his relatives claimed that he was a wealthy businessman and that Wong married him for selfish reasons. However, this claim cannot be proven as Yu has nothing but huge debts. As for Wong, despite the doctor's predictions, she was able to recover after undergoing a series of complicated surgeries and a long rehabilitation process. She learned to walk again and spent most of her earnings on her recovery. In 2023, Wong returned to work and was able to revive her once successful business. She also founded an organization dedicated to helping women who are victims of domestic violence and runs her own blog, where she shares her experiences and warns women against making the same mistakes she did. The case of Stephanie Scott. Stephanie Scott was a 26-year-old kind and intelligent young woman with a passion for education, much like her father, Robert. As a teacher, she enjoyed teaching English and drama at Leeton High School, a job that gave her a great sense of pride and fulfillment. She was known for her enthusiasm, love for learning, and beautiful smile. Stephanie and Aaron's friendship, formed in their youth, blossomed into romance as they entered adulthood. They began dating in 2012 and, after several years of building a life together, decided to take the next step and get married. As the big day, April 11, 2015, was just around the corner, the wedding preparations were well underway. With everything set and almost complete, from catering and decor to travel plans, all they needed to finalize was a dress rehearsal for their special day, dance lessons, and romantic honeymoon arrangements. In early April, Aaron invited Stephanie to a party out of town, but she declined, opting to stay behind and complete some deadline tasks, including preparing lesson plans for her upcoming absence. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, Stephanie went to her school in Leeton, New South Wales, to drop off some homework with a substitute teacher. She parked her car on the street and met a colleague who lived nearby. Together, they opened the school gates and went inside. After locking the gates behind them, Stephanie went to the English department office, where she sent a confirmation email to a bus company about transportation for her wedding guests. After working for a couple more hours, Stephanie felt relieved that she had completed all her tasks. She left the administrative building and headed towards the gates. Meanwhile, Aaron was expecting Stephanie to be away for a few hours, but as the evening approached, he began to worry because he hadn't heard from her. On April 5th, she didn't reply to his messages. When he returned home after 7 p.m., he found that Stephanie was still not there, and her car was missing from the street. At first, Aaron tried to reassure himself that Stephanie might be feeling overwhelmed by the upcoming wedding and her responsibilities as a teacher, and that she just needed some time to herself. Aaron became increasingly concerned as hours passed. As his worry grew, he sent her another text in the morning, then called her family. After Stephanie's disappearance exceeded 24 hours, Aaron reported her missing at the Leeton police station. The police investigation revealed her car was also missing, leading them to speculate she may have been in an accident or stranded while driving away from Leeton High School. To assist in the search, helicopters were deployed and officers were sent to the school. The police investigation was hindered by the limited number of people at the school on Easter Sunday, but this also helped rule out hundreds of suspects. According to the report, Stephanie had deactivated and reactivated the classroom alarm system between 1:30 p.m. and 1:38 p.m. Unfortunately, this was the only concrete detail the police could gather. Attempts to track Stephanie's phone were unsuccessful, as it was turned off. Her bank accounts and social media showed no activity after Saturday, April 4th. A witness who was near Leeton High School on Easter Sunday reported hearing unusual noises around 2 p.m., including rustling and dragging sounds. At the time, the witness saw Stephanie's car parked under a covered walkway, but didn't think much of it. However, the car was later found to be missing. A school employee who was questioned by detectives reported an unusual conversation he had with one of the school's cleaners the day after Stephanie's disappearance. The employee asked the cleaner when he last saw Stephanie, and the cleaner replied that he hadn't seen her on the day she went missing. When questioned about the possibility of Stephanie running away due to wedding stress, Vincent Stanford, the 24-year-old cleaner, responded with a nervous laugh. The witness who observed this interaction also noticed that Vincent had scratches on his face. As a result, the police decided to investigate further and asked Vincent for more information. During the brief conversation with detectives, Vincent explained that he had stopped by the school to empty the trash cans, despite not being scheduled to work that day. He claimed he was in a hurry to buy groceries and only stayed for a short time. Vincent stated that he did not see Stephanie during his visit. He also reported leaving the school around 3 p.m. to go to his usual store. The police investigation took a significant turn when they discovered that the store Vincent claimed to have visited on the specified date was actually closed. This raised suspicions about Vincent's alibi, and investigators decided to question him further. A search of Vincent's home, with his mother's consent, led to the discovery of a key set matching the description of Stephanie Scott's keys. The search of Vincent's home and belongings yielded additional evidence, including several MDF panels in the back seat of his car, which appeared to be stained with blood. Police also noticed tire tracks in front of the house that didn't match Vincent's vehicle. A used condom was found on the ground near the house, with its wrapper discovered in Vincent's bedroom. When questioned about his whereabouts on the day of the murder, Vincent said he was out taking photos. He pointed to a camera in his car as proof, but this explanation only added to the suspicion surrounding him. Detectives obtained permission from Vincent to view the camera. When they turned it on, they saw a disturbing photo of a charred woman's corpse in a wooded area. Vincent attempted to downplay the image, claiming it was a still from a movie he had filmed that he thought was humorous. However, the police quickly realized that the photo was, in fact, a crime scene image of Stephanie Scott. Vincent Stanford, a 24-year-old cleaner at Leon High School, was immediately taken into custody. A search of Vincent's phone and laptop uncovered disturbing photos, including images of young girls and women he had been stalking. A new witness came forward on April 17th, reporting that they saw a car near a canal on Easter Sunday at around 4 p.m. The witness described a man getting out of the car and throwing something that looked like a laptop into the water before driving away. The police retrieved the laptop from the canal and confirmed that it belonged to Stephanie. Meanwhile, divers searched the New South Wales River area for her body. As the search continued, police thoroughly searched fields and vineyards near where Stephanie's car was found earlier in the week, as well as the canal where the laptop was discovered. In a surprising turn of events, Vincent, who was already in custody, requested to speak with the police. He provided detailed information about the crime, including the location of Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was working on a computer in the upstairs teacher's room with her door open. Vincent claimed that he was cleaning the area and needed to take some bins upstairs, which is when he encountered Stephanie. Vincent told detectives that he acted on a sudden urge to kill Stephanie by retrieving a kit containing handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and cleaning supplies from his home. He had also researched violent crimes online. Upon returning, he found Stephanie preparing to leave and, as she walked by, she smiled and wished him a happy Easter. Vincent then grabbed her and dragged her into a storage room. When questioned about the scratches on his face, Vincent attributed them to Stephanie's microphone and her fingernails as she defended herself. He described grabbing her from behind, covering her mouth and wrapping his arm around her waist, before dragging her to the storage room. Once inside, he slammed the door shut, threw her to the ground, and punched her repeatedly. Vincent stabbed Stephanie to death, motivated by a twisted pleasure in the act rather than hatred. He acknowledged a history of violent thoughts and suspected underlying psychological issues. Afterwards, he calmly returned home to eat and drink, leaving her body in the storage room. Vincent returned to the school and put Stephanie's body in the trunk of her car. He then drove the car to his home and parked it on the street. The next day, Easter Monday, Vincent drove the car to a national park. There, he removed Stephanie's body from the trunk and left it on the ground. He observed that her face was severely bruised and swollen, with a large bruise under her eye. Vincent covered the body with branches and doused it with gasoline. He then used a match to set the body on fire and discarded the match. For a short time, Vincent stayed at the scene, taking several photos of Stephanie's body with his camera. He waited for a few minutes to ensure the fire was burning steadily before leaving. Afterward, he abandoned Stephanie's car on a remote country road and walked back to town. Vincent denied brutally treating Stephanie, despite detectives knowing otherwise. He faced additional charges of severe harm and physical injury. Questioned about photos of the woman partially undressed, Vincent claimed he often removed her clothes, leaving her bra, which he kept as a souvenir. However, Vincent had actually sent the wedding and graduation rings to his twin brother, Marcus, in Adelaide. Marcus sold the stolen items at a jewelry store and destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photo of it. A 24-year-old man, identified as Marcus, was arrested at his home in the Adelaide Hills at 7 a.m. Marcus worked on a flower farm and was described by colleagues as quiet and reserved, rarely interacting with them outside of work. During the trial, Marcus Stanford was unrepresented by a lawyer. When the judge asked if there were any reasons he should not be sent to Leeton, Marcus responded in a strong Dutch accent that he had never been to Leeton and saw no reason to go. The search for Stephanie eventually came to a tragic end. While Vincent was still confessing to the crime, the police had already discovered Stephanie's body, just one day before her scheduled wedding date. A badly burned female body was found in a national park, approximately 60 miles from Leeton Middle School. A thorough investigation revealed that Stephanie had suffered a brutal attack, receiving 40 blows to the head, which ultimately led to her death. She had also been stabbed in the neck before her body was discarded and set on fire. Photographs found on Vincent's phone were identified as being of Stephanie, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Both Vincent and his brother Marcus were brought to trial. Initially, Vincent denied any involvement in the crime. Vincent Stanford was deemed a danger to society after undergoing psychological tests, which indicated he was a potential serial killer. He showed a disturbing lack of emotions and empathy, often reacting to serious situations with laughter and indifference. Further investigation into his past revealed several alarming incidents. Vincent was born in Australia, but his family relocated to the Netherlands when he was 3 years old. They later returned to New South Wales when he was 7. As a child, Vincent exhibited concerning behavior, including fantasizing about committing murder at the age of 12 and nearly strangling his teacher. His classmates described him as a psychopath, and he was eventually sent to a behavioral correction school due to his violent and disobedient behavior. Vincent would sneak into the women's restroom to secretly observe female students during lunch breaks. His phone contained 2,000 photos of a young girl and a diary documenting his observations, including following her home and recording her schedule. One entry read, "She's home alone at 15:40. Enough time to abduct." The investigation into Stephanie Scott's murder took a surprising turn when her killer's twin brother, Marcus Stanford, was found to be involved. A search of the Stanford home uncovered evidence, including Stephanie's blood on a knife and her bra. Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison for selling Stephanie's stolen jewelry and aiding his brother. After his release in October 2016, the Leeton community expressed outrage and made it clear Marcus was not welcome. A petition with over 60 signatures called for an appeal of the court's decision. Marcus briefly returned to Leeton before leaving the area, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Marcus has expressed genuine remorse for his past actions and has acknowledged that his behavior was reckless and regrettable. Since his release, he has made it clear that he intends to avoid trouble and move forward with his life. However, he also wants to maintain his distance from his twin brother, Vincent, and has no interest in rekindling their relationship. Vincent has been sentenced to life in prison for murder and 15 years for aggravated sexual assault, with both sentences effective as of April 8, 2015. The case of Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a large family with 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to provide for their children. Lori was especially close to her brother Alex, who always looked out for her and protected her, even during her school years. As she grew older, Lori became a beautiful and charismatic young woman with many admirers. She was a blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile. She enjoyed being the center of attention and was a spirited and adventurous person. In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart, Nelson Yanes. However, the young couple soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were not ready for family life. As a result, their marriage ended in less than a year. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William Leah. A year later, they had a son named Colby. However, their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years later. Lori retained custody of her son. In 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from a previous marriage the following year. They also had a daughter, Tylee. However, this marriage ended in 2005. Shortly after, Joseph visited their children and got into an altercation with Lori's brother, Alex. Alex claimed he was defending Lori's honor, as Joseph had insulted her. As a result, Lori was fined and received a short prison sentence. After her divorce, Lori met Charles Anthony Vallow and married him in February 2006. Charles was 17 years older than Lori, but this significant age difference didn't pose a problem for they. Charles had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from previous relationships. The family initially lived in Nevada, where Lori's children from previous marriages resided, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income to support the family. Lori did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, they officially adopted Charles's grandnephew, Joshua Jackson Vallow, also known as JJ, who had autism. The family was able to provide JJ with the expensive therapy he needed. By the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands. By this time, Colby and Charles's older children were living on their own, so the Vallow family moved to the island with just the four of them, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. They settled in a popular tourist area and decided to open a beach bar, specializing in fresh juices, smoothies, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their efforts and Charles's experience in trade, the business struggled to compete and ultimately failed. Around this time, Lori developed an interest in spiritual literature and became particularly drawn to a series of books called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She was deeply captivated by his views and ideas, becoming almost obsessed with his writings, and began reading his books daily. In 2016, Lori Vallow and her family were forced to leave Hawaii and relocate to the mainland, eventually settling in Arizona. While her husband Charles worked hard to provide for the family, Lori became increasingly obsessed with her faith, drifting away from reality. 2 years later, in October 2018, Lori and her friend Melanie attended a seminar called Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ in a nearby town, led by Chad Daybell. Lori was a huge fan of Daybell and was thrilled to meet him in person. She sat in the front row, captivated by his words, and caught his attention. After the event, Daybell engaged with his followers, and Lori stayed behind to talk to him. She was drawn to him and asked if she could touch his hand. Daybell, looking into her eyes, told her that they had been husband and wife in 7 past lives. Chad and Lori started communicating regularly a few weeks after exchanging contact information. When Lori's husband traveled to Nevada for work, Lori invited Chad to host a gathering at her home, which drew around a dozen people. They discussed God and the Judgment Day. Lori and Chad began working together to prepare people for what they believed would be a catastrophic judgment. They started producing podcasts, leading sermons, and writing articles on the topic. As Lori became more engrossed in her newfound faith, she began to detach from reality and her family. Charles didn't immediately realize the full extent of the change, believing it to be a passing phase that would soon go away. However, by the time Charles realized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori's beliefs became increasingly extreme, and she started talking about battling dark spirits and zombies. She claimed that God had chosen her for a special mission to destroy these evil entities. Charles's efforts to bring his wife back to reality were unsuccessful, and she started to view him as a malevolent entity that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles was on the verge of collapse. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori changed the locks on their shared home. When Charles returned, he found himself locked out of his own house, his personal car and family truck were missing, and a significant amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. Charles tried to enter the house, calling out for his wife, but Lori, in a frantic state, rushed outside, shouting threats and curses. She claimed that her husband's soul had long been dead, and his body was possessed by a demon, repeatedly saying, "I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Charles immediately went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him, blocking access to his home and children, and threatening him with physical harm. As a result, a protective order was issued, which prohibited Lori from approaching him. During the police interview, Charles expressed concerns about Lori's extreme religious behavior, her claims that the world was ending soon, and her tendency to label people as either good or evil. Although the officers seemed skeptical and even made fun of Charles, they still issued the protective order. The next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. According to his lawyer, Charles was worried about the well-being of his son JJ, who needed special care. He trusted that his mother and sister would manage the insurance payout responsibly and take care of JJ if anything happened to him. Months later, in an attempt to reconcile with his wife Lori and salvage their marriage, Charles made a critical error. He dropped the restraining order that had been protecting him. As a result, Charles began visiting Lori at her home, driven by a desire to reconnect with his children and revive his relationship. Tragically, on July 11, 2019, Charles's bid at reconciliation ended in disaster. When he arrived at the house, he was shot twice in the chest and killed. Lori's brother, Alex, admitted to the shooting and called 911. He claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Charles had attacked him first with a baseball bat. According to Alex, he responded by firing his pistol twice without taking aim. Witnesses to the shooting included the homeowner and the children. Although their testimonies were slightly inconsistent, the court ultimately ruled Charles's death an unintentional killing in self-defense. It's worth noting that Alex sustained only minor injuries. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their house, complete with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco in the exact spot where her husband had been shot, with visible bloodstains still present. Strangely, she made no arrangements for his funeral and didn't inform anyone about his death. It wasn't until a week later, when Charles's unclaimed body remained in the morgue, that his sons, mother, sister, and other relatives learned of his passing. Lori's life took a dramatic turn after her husband's death. She sold their home in Arizona and moved to Rexburg, Idaho, with her children. They settled in the same housing complex as her brother Alex Cox and his wife, Tammy. Lori enrolled her son in a special needs school, but her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend any school. As a result, many neighbors were unaware that Lori even had a second child, as Tylee was rarely seen outside. Around the same time, Lori made a disturbing comment about her daughter, referring to her as a dark entity in a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Lori, her children, and her brother Alex went on a trip to Yellowstone Park, where they met up with Chad. Several photos from the trip show Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen again. 2 weeks later, on September 24, 2019, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the special needs school, claiming she would homeschool him. Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, died suddenly on October 19th, less than a month after her husband's affair with Lori began. According to Chad, Tammy had been suffering from a cold and cough, and it was presumed that she died from respiratory failure in her sleep. There were no signs of violence on her body, and her death was ruled natural. However, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to determine the cause of death, a decision that raised no suspicions at the time. Following Tammy's passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they got married in a beachside ceremony. This news came as a shock to Chad's children, who were still grieving the loss of their mother and struggled to understand their father's actions. After returning to Arizona, they lived together and misled others by claiming that Lori's children were staying with relatives or that she didn't have any children at all. They also rented a storage unit and moved the children's belongings there, essentially erasing them from their home. On December 12, 2019, approximately 1 month later, Alex unexpectedly died at his home, appearing to have suffered a heart attack. At his family's request, no autopsy was performed, and his death was attributed to natural causes. As time went on, more and more people began inquiring about the whereabouts of Lori's children. She skillfully deceived her neighbors and acquaintances with lies, but it was more challenging to convince her relatives. Colby, Lori's eldest son, who had lost touch with his mother after moving away, made an effort to reconnect with his younger sister. However, Lori initially pretended to be her daughter, Tylee, when Colby contacted her. He soon became suspicious that something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles Vallow's relatives were concerned about the welfare of his grandchild, JJ, and repeatedly requested to visit or contact him. Lori consistently denied or made up excuses to prevent them from seeing the boy. The situation escalated when JJ's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police. Colby also approached the authorities to help locate his younger sister. When police officers visited Lori's home to speak with the children, she lied about their whereabouts, claiming they were visiting relatives. After this information proved false, the police gave Lori an ultimatum. She had a week to appear at the police station with the children. Instead, she and her husband fled to Hawaii. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search of Lori and Chad's home was conducted, but no signs of the missing children, Tylee and JJ, were found. Initially, Chad had defended Lori, claiming she didn't have any children, but now he was also under suspicion. It wasn't until June 9th that police discovered human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bodies were those of Ty and JJ. Further investigation led to the exhumation of the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to determine the true causes of their deaths. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of chemicals that could induce heart failure, suggesting that their deaths were not natural. Lori and Chad's trial began in January 2021. They faced charges of conspiracy, first-degree criminal acts, grand theft, deceit, and insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles Vallow's death were reclassified from self-defense to premeditated murder. In court, witnesses testified that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and claimed she wanted to save their souls. There were allegations that the deaths of Tylee and JJ may have been ritualistic in nature. Notably, Tylee's body was partially burned, and Chad had previously sent Lori an email categorizing people, including Tylee, as having dark spirits. Lori and her husband, Chad, were both facing the possibility of capital punishment due to the severity of the charges against them. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent to stand trial, bringing the proceedings to a halt. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained that their father was innocent and had been framed by Lori and her co-conspirator. After receiving treatment at a psychiatric facility, Lori was deemed fit to stand trial again in 2022. In March 2023, the judge ruled that capital punishment would not be an option for Lori, a decision that the prosecution is still trying to appeal. Lori was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in July 2023. Chad's trial is ongoing, and he still faces the possibility of capital punishment. The case of Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in 1963 in Weatherford, Texas. Karen Kaler White, his future wife, was born in the same city 2 years later, in 1965. They met while attending a Texas university in the early 1980s. At the time, Craig was a graduating engineering student, and Karen was a freshman studying humanities. They quickly discovered common interests and started a romantic relationship. Young and in love, they appeared to be the ideal couple, with Craig standing out as a top student due to his exceptional determination and engineering talent. After graduating in the late 1980s, they had a modest wedding with only close friends and family in attendance. They welcomed their first child, Emily, in 1991, and their second child, Lauren, in 1993. The family lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle by local standards. In 1999, While Karen was pregnant with their third child, Craig received a lucrative job offer from a large utility company in Weatherford. His promotion coincided with the birth of their son, Sean, whom he cherished. Craig purchased a large house in a highly respected neighborhood in the city, along with a dependable car for his family. He became the main provider for the family, while Karen stayed at home. On the surface, the family appeared to be flawless. Their daughters, Emily and Lauren, were gifted in sports and music, frequently taking part in singing competitions and local activities. Emily was an outstanding student who went on to attend a prestigious pharmacy college, whereas Lauren, also an excellent student, aspired to enroll in a conservatory to pursue a music career. Their son, Sean, was a friendly, curious boy with a passion for mathematics and a dream of becoming an archaeologist. He had a close relationship with his parents and sisters. Craig supported the family financially, while Karen ensured the home was welcoming, took care of the children, and enjoyed baking. They was actively involved in community work, aiming to enhance their neighborhood, and had raised 3 gifted and wonderful children. However, despite their seemingly perfect life, the family was hiding numerous issues. In 2007, Karen confided in her younger sister, Linda, revealing that she was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Karen expressed her distress over Craig's controlling behavior, which had been ongoing for years and was escalating. Craig insisted on a detailed record of every single expense, no matter how small, including daily household costs. Karen had to provide him with receipts from the supermarket, bank statements, and even report her daily activities while he was at work. The entire family was bound to a strict schedule set by Craig, dictating when they had to be home, sleep, wake up, eat, and even when they could be intimate. As time passed, Craig's need for control grew stronger. He became increasingly demanding and selfish, scheduling Karen's every move down to the hour. Karen felt trapped, with no personal time, only duties and responsibilities. She tried to meet all of Craig's demands, hoping he would eventually ease up and they could return to their previous life. However, Craig seemed to take pleasure in his control and showed no willingness to change. Linda was deeply disturbed by what her sister shared, having, like everyone else, perceived Craig as the ideal husband and family man, only to discover he was a tyrant at home. Despite this, Karen didn't want to break up her family and was financially dependent on Craig, along with their children. So, she decided to look for a job that could provide a stable income. Karen, a mother of 3, had maintained a remarkable physical shape despite her advanced age. She prioritized good nutrition, occasional dieting, self-care, and daily jogging. Unbeknownst to her husband Craig, Karen joined a local fitness club, where she spent several hours each day working out. This newfound hobby allowed her to relieve stress, find distraction, and clarify her thoughts. As Craig was at work, he remained unaware of her fitness routine. The fitness club management soon took notice of Karen, an attractive, fit, and dedicated individual. They offered her a trial opportunity to become a fitness instructor with the potential for a formal employment contract. Karen, a former stay-at-home wife, was thrilled by this unexpected chance to turn her passion into a paid career. When Craig eventually discovered Karen's secret, she anticipated a negative reaction, guess him to prohibit her from continuing. However, he responded calmly and seemed pleased that his wife had found a fulfilling activity that also earned her an income. Karen's husband had 3 conditions for their new arrangement. She had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and maintain their intimate life. Karen agreed, as this gave her the freedom to manage her daily life and finances without needing to justify every expense to her husband. At the fitness club where she worked, Karen met Sunny Reese, a new instructor. They quickly became friends, and for Karen, who had been a stay-at-home mom for years, Sunny became a trusted confidant. As their friendship grew, Karen and Sunny spent more time together, going for walks, drinking coffee, and having in-depth conversations. Their friendship eventually evolved into something more, but they kept their relationship a secret. Karen knew she had to confess to her husband, but struggled to find the right words and worried about the consequences. After months of preparation, she finally opened up to Craig. Although Craig was initially perplexed by his wife's confession, he remained calm and composed. The next day, he revealed that he was open to his wife's relationship with Sunny, but only if he could be a part of it. This proposal left Karen stunned and unsure of how to respond. Craig, however, took the lead and started wooing Sunny, showering her with flowers and small gifts. To him, this seemed like a chance to spice up his intimate life and bring passion back into his marriage to Karen. Initially, the two women agreed to Craig's proposal, but it didn't take long for them to realize that he was trying to assert his dominance. Their unusual love triangle was short-lived, and Craig was eventually told that he was no longer welcome in their relationship. Feeling offended, Craig ordered Karen to end the affair immediately, but she continued to see Sunny, having genuinely fallen in love. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, it appeared that Karen was willing to leave her husband for a new relationship. Craig relocated his family to Columbia, Missouri. He became the water director, hoping the move would end his wife's affair with Sunny and restore normal family life. The 2008 move proved challenging. The children adapted to new schools and made friends, while Craig thought he'd severed ties between Karen and Sunny. However, Karen and Sunny continued to secretly communicate through phone calls, texts, and meetings. Karen and Sunny would meet halfway at a roadside hotel, spending a couple of hours together before returning home. By this time, Karen was aware her marriage was failing. She no longer loved her husband, and it was only a matter of time before they divorced. These secret meetings continued until December 2008. On New Year's Eve, the Kaler family visited their hometown to see family and friends. Sunny was also at the party. Initially, Karen and Sunny kept a low profile, just exchanging greetings. However, as the party went on and they drank more, they became less concerned about what others thought. They were inseparable, holding hands, exchanging romantic glances, and were even seen kissing by some guests. Craig was furious, feeling insulted and humiliated by Karen's public display of her affair in front of dozens of friends, former roommates, and co-workers. He verbally attacked Karen and Sunny at the party, then forcibly dragged Karen away. On the way home, Craig lost control, grabbing Karen by the shoulders and shaking her violently, ripping her dress. He then slapped her, causing her to stumble and fall, hitting her head hard. Harassment continued after they returned home, and the conflict didn't subside. Karen told Craig a few days later that she was leaving him and started divorce proceedings, asking for custody of the children. Initially, Craig apologized and begged her to stay for the children's sake, suggesting they give their marriage another try. However, Karen was resolute and got a divorce. Craig then called their mutual friends and relatives, asking them to persuade Karen to stay with him and not break up the family. She informed him that she was ending their marriage to be with Sunny, admitting that she had never found true happiness with him. In early spring 2009, Craig and Karen got into another argument while still living together. This time, Craig became physically violent, prompting Karen to report him to the police, resulting in his arrest. However, Craig downplayed the incident at the police station, claiming he only restrained Karen to calm her down, which caused her bruises. Following this incident, Karen took the children and moved out without waiting for their divorce to be finalized. Craig was devastated and angry, especially when he found out his daughters, Emily and Lauren, sided with their mother, saying they had finally seen her happy after a long time. Craig felt betrayed and refused to communicate with his daughters, only spending time with his son Sean on weekends. Meanwhile, Craig held on to the hope that Karen would change her mind and return to him. His jealousy led him to try to control her, following her everywhere, watching her house, and even attempting to install a hidden camera. His obsessive behavior negatively impacted his job performance, resulting in him eventually missing work without a valid reason, which ultimately led to him being fired. After losing his job and income, Craig was forced to move in with his parents. With plenty of free time, he began stalking his ex-wife, Karen. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit her 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in the small town of Burlingame, Kansas. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame Police Department received a call about a suspicious van and gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported seeing a small truck pull up to her house, and a man got out and entered the house. They heard screams and gunshots, but didn't intervene, fearing the man was armed. The man quickly left the house and drove away. When police arrived, they found a terrified 10-year-old boy, Sean Kaler, calling for help. He couldn't explain what happened, but police soon discovered a horrific scene. Inside the house, near the front door, they found Dorothy lying in a pool of blood, surprisingly alive despite 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police discovered 44-year-old Karen's body. She had been shot in the chest and then fatally shot in the head at close range by her ex-husband, leaving her no chance of survival. Nearby, between a wall and a couch, lay the body of Karen's 18-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily had attempted to hide from her enraged father but was found and killed with 2 point-blank shots. Upstairs, in a second-floor bedroom, Emily's younger sister Lauren was found in a pool of blood, still alive. Lauren fatally begged for her life, repeatedly stating that her father was responsible for the attack. Lauren and her great-grandmother were immediately rushed to the intensive care unit of a nearby hospital. Unfortunately, despite medical efforts, neither survived. Lauren died on December 1st due to massive blood loss and internal organ damage, while her great-grandmother passed away a few hours later. The only person who survived, Sean, was in shock. Psychologists helped him deal with the trauma he experienced, and since he was the only one who saw what happened at his great-grandmother's house, he needed to be questioned carefully. That evening, Sean's mother was preparing dinner in the kitchen when he approached her to ask for his favorite pies. Suddenly, the back door swung open and his father, Craig, entered with a shotgun. Without a word, Craig pointed the gun at his ex-wife and shot her, then fired again at closer range. Sean was initially frozen in horror, but when his father turned to him and stared silently, he realized he had to escape. He jumped out the open back door and ran towards the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother, sisters, and get help. However, upon reaching the threshold, Sean heard more gunshots and, fearing for his safety, hid in a nearby outbuilding. He heard additional shots and waited in terror. Craig was immediately added to the wanted list, with a warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. The police received reports of a speeding truck, which helped them quickly determine the direction Craig was heading. At one point, Craig abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement caught up with Craig the next morning and arrested him without resistance. In the vehicle, they found a rifle, ammunition, and medication for depression and anxiety next to the driver's seat. Craig appeared confused and frightened, admitting to being armed but stating he had no intention of using the weapons. At the police station, Craig initially confessed to his crimes and openly shared his story with the investigating officer. He explained how his wife's infidelity with Sonny and their public humiliation of him had led to his downward spiral. He shared how his efforts to save his marriage resulted in job loss and further erosion of his self-respect. Overcome with emotion, Craig expressed regret and a sense of betrayal by those closest to him, including his daughters. Craig's trial started in December 2010. His lawyer, Thomas Heaney, advised him to recant his initial confession and blame his actions on mental illness and insanity. This was Craig's only way to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney argued that Craig's mental state was severely impacted after his wife left him for someone else, his children sided with their mother, he lost his job, and had to move back into his parents' home. According to Heaney, these factors led to Craig's breakdown, causing him to commit the crime while insane and unaware of his actions. However, prior to 1995, a law in Kansas allowed for leniency if a defendant pleaded insanity, but this law was repealed. The prosecution found no evidence of insanity in Craig's actions, only deliberate planning. Craig bought guns and ammunition beforehand, went to the house where his family was, shot each victim twice to ensure no chance of survival, but intentionally let his son Sean escape. In August 2011, Craig was convicted of all charges and received a death sentence. At the final hearing, 12-year-old Sean testified, stating he didn't want his father to die because he was his only remaining close relative. Despite numerous appeals, the verdict remained unchanged. Today, Mr. Kaler is still imprisoned, fighting to have his case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. Following the death of his mother and sisters, Sean is now an adult, having completed his education, and has chosen to stay and work in his home state. The case of Courtney Holden. The Holden family, a typical American household in Spokane. Judy and John Holden, who had 2 grown daughters living independently, also had an adopted son, Joshua, who still lived with them. Joshua, a quiet and introverted young man, had not yet started his own family and remained at home. The Holden's family approach to childcare was unconventional. The family saw fostering as a way to earn a steady income through government benefits. Judy's background and experience as a mother earned the authorities as trust. 4-year-old Courtney Holden, born on February 28, 1992, had been living in a shelter for 2 years when her life took a dramatic turn. In 1996, Courtney moved to Spokane to join the Holden family, comprised of Joshua and several other foster children. The little girl's heart was filled with hope for a loving and caring family. However, her dreams were short-lived. From a young age, Courtney was forced to bear the burden of excessive household chores. She was responsible for cleaning the entire house and washing dishes for every meal. If she made even the slightest mistake, she faced punishment. Life in the Holden home quickly became a nightmare, surpassing the hardships she experienced in the house. What was surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children with kindness, but they showed inexplicable hatred towards Courtney. Judy Holden was already an adult when Courtney joined the family, and Courtney was the last child they took from the orphanage. This might be the reason for their unusual behavior towards her. Courtney was subjected to strict rules, including being forbidden from going outside without permission. Visitors to the Holden home often witnessed Judy and Joshua mistreating Courtney, calling her Cinderella in a derogatory manner. Courtney found herself in a difficult situation, but she was a resilient girl who adapted to the harsh conditions over time. She learned to fear her foster mother and was terrified of her brother Joshua, who prohibited her from socializing with friends and peers. She was not allowed to have a mobile phone or other modern conveniences, and she only left the house when necessary and with permission. The only times she enjoyed some freedom were when the house was empty and she could step out into the backyard or chat with neighbors. As she grew into an adult, Courtney became accustomed to her life and learned to treat her foster parents with respect, despite their mistreatment. She did not become bitter, as she had no concept of a normal family life to compare hers to. Courtney's life improved significantly when her brother Joshua moved out of the house due to disagreements with their parents. This newfound freedom allowed her to come and go as she pleased, spend time with friends, and enjoy activities she had previously been restricted from. As a result, Courtney finally felt happy. As time passed, Courtney graduated from school and met a man named Michael, with whom she fell deeply in love. Michael treated her with kindness and care, a stark contrast to her previous experiences. Their relationship flourished, and they welcomed a son together in 2011. However, things took a surprising turn when Michael asked Courtney to move in with him and start a life together as a family. Despite his requests, Courtney chose to remain in her parents' house and ended her romantic relationship with Michael. By this time, the Holden house had become empty, as the foster children had grown up and moved out. Courtney's foster father, John Holden, had passed away, leaving her to live with her foster mother, Judy, and her child. Michael was allowed to visit his son, but only with Judy's permission. During Joshua's absence, Courtney's life with her son was relatively peaceful. However, after their father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to harass the family. He installed numerous surveillance cameras around the house, posting signs that read, "Smile, you're on camera." The cameras made Courtney anxious, as she knew that leaving the house would likely result in trouble from Joshua. Courtney's life took a turn for the worse around 2015. She confided in a neighbor that Joshua had taken away her freedom, forbidding her from having a phone, using social media, talking to outsiders, driving, or leaving the house without his permission. He also forced her to cut ties with Michael after the child's birth. Despite this, Courtney remained silent and compliant. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms and asked her about them. She openly admitted that Joshua was physically abusing her. The neighbors were concerned and tried to help her, even contacting the police. However, the Holdens were able to dismiss the cases because Courtney never publicly acknowledged the abuse. As time went on, Courtney was no longer allowed to talk to her neighbors, who only saw her outside in the evenings. She obeyed Joshua's rules without question. Those who knew Joshua described him as a large and intimidating man with a cruel and unpredictable nature. He was also known to be paranoid and prone to insults. Joshua had a history of violent behavior and had even boasted about being able to kill someone and dispose of their body with ease. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence and the victim's refusal to cooperate with the police. There were also suspicions that he had committed assault and misconduct against a woman in 2003, but he was never identified as the perpetrator. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for domestic violence against his mother and for burglary, leading to him leaving home for several years. The last message Courtney sent to a friend on Facebook, nearly 2 years ago, was a desperate cry for help. "I have to go. I must leave. Josh is coming." After that, her account went silent. Family acquaintances described the dynamics within the Holden household as strange and controlling. They were particularly puzzled by the fact that Courtney's child referred to Joshua's mother, Judy, as Mom and Joshua as Dad, while Courtney was referred to only by her first name. In August 2018, a heated argument escalated, prompting Courtney to try to leave, but Joshua, larger and stronger, physically restrained her and carried her back inside. It's the last time she was seen outside the household. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later, in October 2019, that concerns about Courtney's disappearance began to grow. Michael and his girlfriend, who had not seen Courtney in almost 2 years, started to worry about her whereabouts. He was eager to see his child, filed a missing person report with the police on October 24th, sparking an investigation into Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens claimed that Courtney had abandoned her child and fled. However, they could not explain who was continuing to access her Social Security benefits and electronic food stamps. On the same day as the search, Joshua and Judy withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. The next day, a woman claiming to be Courtney called the National Center for Criminal Information, stating that she was safe and did not want to be searched for. However, the police discovered that she was actually one of Courtney's stepsisters. As the investigation continued, Joshua and Judy provided multiple conflicting accounts of Courtney's disappearance. They claimed that she had run away with a truck driver, and later, that she had left with a secret lover. The inconsistencies in their stories, combined with Courtney's unexplained absence, raised suspicions that the Holdens were hiding something. In October 2019, Joshua and Judy Holden suddenly left Spokane, further arousing the suspicions of detectives investigating the disappearance of Courtney. The Holdens' family flight from the area strengthened the detectives' conviction that they were involved in Courtney's disappearance. The investigation into Courtney's disappearance continued, and the Spokane Police Department attempted a welfare check in early October, which quickly escalated into a missing person case. The case was assigned to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser, who has spoken publicly about the investigation. The information gathered from police interviews and court records has shed light on the events surrounding Courtney's disappearance. When Lesser visited the house in early October, Judy told him that Courtney had been home just a few days prior. She claimed that Courtney had left on foot with her son. However, when Lesser asked for Judy's phone number, she became hostile and locked the door in his face. Later, Judy allowed police to enter the house to see Courtney's room, but she became very nervous. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of items covering all available space on counters. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress was bare, giving the impression that no one had lived there recently. At one point, Judy panicked when she lost sight of one of the detectives behind a closed door and ordered the investigators to leave. When Lesser asked to search the rest of the house for Courtney's child, Judy refused. A neighbor reported seeing Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leaving in a van with a child. Detective Lesser found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic illness, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. Her last prescription was in July 2018, although she had been receiving medications monthly before disappearing. Surveillance footage showed Joshua and Judy shopping with a small child. Cameras also captured they withdrawing money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was declared missing. By October 24th, Joshua and Judy had left their home. When police arrived to execute a search warrant, they found that the DVR from the home surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone. Joshua and Judy's mobile numbers were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers with Texas area codes were activated on the same day. A month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called the police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband, who had flown in from Texas to check on the property. They claimed they hadn't seen Courtney in 2 years and that Judy had retired. In mid-December, Joshua and Judy traveled to Texas, where they were eventually found by the police at Judy's daughter's house. Courtney's son was also present at the scene. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested and charged with identity theft, interfering with child custody, and using Courtney's bank accounts without her permission. Fortunately, the child was found safe and was reunited with his father. No other family members were charged with any crimes. The police searched Judy's home in Spokane with search dogs but did not find any signs of Courtney. They also searched a home in Texas and a vehicle in Oklahoma, but these searches did not yield any clues about Courtney's whereabouts. Joshua, 40, and Judy, 74, were held in a Texas jail, where they refused to speak with police and fought extradition to Spokane. The authorities awaited a governor's warrant to bring them back, but since there was insufficient evidence to link them to Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This case remains one of the most puzzling missing person cases, with little progress made during the month-long investigation. The police have extensive notes on the case, but Judy and Joshua maintain their innocence in Courtney's disappearance. The police, however, suspect that Courtney is likely deceased, but they lack concrete evidence to prove it. It's tragic that Courtney was drawn into the Holden family, who failed to provide her with the love and support she desperately sought. Despite their mistreatment, Courtney wanted to believe they were her family and struggled to defend herself against their cruelty. The cruel reality is that there are many ways to secretly dispose of a body using chemicals that can evade detection by experts and police dogs, leaving Courtney's fate a heartbreaking mystery. The case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers, the future wife of Rob Andrew, was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. She grew up in a devout Christian family that prioritized faith and family values. Her childhood was filled with regular family meals, group prayers, and church attendance. As a result, Brenda developed into a quiet and peaceful individual who excelled academically and spent much of her free time volunteering at church. As a high school student, Brenda was a cheerleader for the soccer team and enjoyed dancing, but she avoided parties and social gatherings. She aspired to be like her mother, who was a model of piety and modesty. Brenda's goal was to become a housewife after marriage, devoting herself to her husband and children. At the age of 17, Brenda met her first love, Rob Andrew, who was the older brother of her friend. Despite their different denominational backgrounds, Rob was a Baptist and Brenda a Lutheran. They shared conservative views on life, a strong faith, and a dream of building a large and close-knit family. The friendly relationship between them blossomed into something more. Although they were separated by 125 miles when she started college in Winfield, Kansas, they maintained regular communication. To be closer to her partner, Brenda transferred to a university in Stillwater, Ohio, a year later. They eventually got married in the summer of 1984. As Rob's career took off, he received a job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he had initially hesitated, Brenda convinced him to take the opportunity. While Rob thrived as an advertising manager, Brenda completed her degree and secured a job in banking. She fell in love with the city's vibrant nightlife, impressive skyscrapers, and fast-paced lifestyle. Her time in Texas brought about a transformation in Brenda, as she overcame her initial shyness and developed a more outgoing personality. She started taking care of her appearance, dressing fashionably, wearing makeup, and building a large social network. Rob was unhappy with the changes he saw in his wife. He believed a woman of faith should be more subdued. Additionally, Rob was homesick and eager to return to his old life. When he was offered his old job back at an advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he jumped at the opportunity. However, Brenda was not supportive of his decision. They argued about it, but eventually found a compromise. They agreed that Rob would settle in the new location, find a suitable house, and if everything worked out, Brenda would join him. They lived apart for a few months, but eventually reunited. In the early 1990s, they moved into a luxurious house in the upscale neighborhood of Lansbrook. Brenda gave birth to a daughter 9 months later. She even quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and devote herself to raising their child. 4 years later, they welcomed the son Parker. It seemed like they had the perfect life, love, children, a beautiful home, and financial security. On November 20th, 2001, Rob had arranged to pick up the children from his ex-wife to spend the holiday with them. At the time, they were divorced. In the evening, Brenda greeted him at the door and asked him to go to the garage to help her with some faulty equipment. Rob was bending down when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, and a gunshot rang out. Around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance rushed to the scene, where paramedics found a horrific scene in the garage. A man lay in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, was shot in the arm but alive. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and she appeared detached from the situation. The paramedics believed she was in shock. She told them that she tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. Brenda's hand was bandaged, and she was taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left, police began investigating the scene. They found a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. The officers also noticed that the victim still had his wallet on him, ruling out robbery as a motive. At the clinic, Brenda explained that she and Andrew were together when two masked and armed men suddenly entered the garage. Although she couldn't make out what they were shouting, one of the men shot Andrew twice, and the other wounded her as she tried to escape. The attackers then quickly fled the scene. Brenda claimed that Andrew was a kind and helpful person who didn't have any enemies. She acknowledged feeling frightened by the attack, especially since there were children in the house at the time. However, her account raised suspicions, and the police noticed several inconsistencies in her story. Notably, she mentioned that the children were present during the attack, but it was clear that they had not been prepared for a trip, contradicting her earlier statement. Interviews with neighbors yielded no useful information. To gain insight into Brenda and Rob's personal life, detectives questioned their friends and acquaintances, revealing marital problems since their second child's birth. Friends and Pastor Andrew reported that Rob confided in them about Brenda's abusive behavior and her hatred for their marriage. Ronnie Street, a close friend of the Roberts family, observed that Brenda's behavior had become unusual. She was open about her feelings, even with strangers, and her husband Rob seemed to love her unconditionally, forgiving her for her antics. Friends of the family noted that Brenda had undergone a significant change from being a typical housewife to someone with loose morals. There was substantial evidence to support these claims. Brenda seemed to be having a midlife crisis, dressing more provocatively and becoming secretive towards her husband. Rob soon discovered she was having an affair, which began in October 1997 with Rick Nunley, a co-worker from the Oklahoma bank. Brenda was married, but secretly dated someone for a year and then maintained occasional phone contact. She then started an affair with James Higgins, a local store owner, who was drawn to her bold style and flirting. They met secretly in a hotel room once or twice a week for about 5 years. Meanwhile, Brenda's husband, Rob, remained unaware of her infidelity. However, he couldn't help but notice that their marriage was falling apart. His wife had become distant, rarely speaking to him or spending time with him. Rob tried his best to hold the family together, hoping that things would eventually improve. In 2001, Brenda ended her affair with Higgins, but not because she wanted to salvage her marriage. Instead, she was sinking deeper into a life of immorality and vice. Around this time, a new Baptist church had opened in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to the efforts of Brenda's husband, Rob. He became a deacon at the church, and Brenda taught Sunday school. From the outside, it seemed like they were a perfect, moral family. Brenda, a devoted wife, taught her children about faith and community. She met James Pavitt, a part-time teacher and friend of Rob, who was drawn to her charm. As their relationship blossomed in 2001, they kept it secret but eventually became open about their feelings. Rob's suspicions of Brenda's infidelity led to a heated argument and separation. James also ended his marriage. While Rob hoped to reconcile, Brenda filed for divorce. A mysterious phone call and car malfunction followed, leading Rob to suspect James and Brenda were behind the attempt on his life. He reported his concerns to the police, raising questions about what drove him to make such a claim. Rob Andrew and his wife Brenda's divorce was already settled, including a custody agreement for their children. However, a large insurance policy taken out by James Pavitt could still financially benefit Brenda upon Rob's death. In fact, just months prior, James had sold Rob an $800,000 life insurance policy, listing Brenda as the sole beneficiary. This raised suspicions about Brenda's involvement in the recent violent attack on Rob. Detectives discovered that Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt, was involved in the insurance scheme and that Rob had tried to remove Brenda from the policy 2 weeks before the incident, but James refused, citing that only Brenda could make changes as the beneficiary. Rob didn't take his former friend's word for it, so he decided to investigate further by speaking with management. What he found out was shocking. Brenda and James had tried to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Brenda, falsifying Rob's signature and backdating the document. However, Rob was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy and that only the policyholder could make changes to the contract. When James found out about this, he was furious, as this discovery was the reason for his termination. In a separate development, an inspection at the neighbor's house, the Gigstad's family, yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun in question was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home, and there were no signs of forced entry. Mrs. Gigstad revealed that she had given a spare key of their home to Brenda Andrew. Additional, James's daughter provided another crucial piece of evidence. On the day of the crime, she had lent her car to her father, who promised to have it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, Joanna noticed that the repairs had not been made. Moreover, she found a .22 caliber bullet in the car, which she thought was suspicious. When she told her father about the bullet, he instructed her to get rid of it. Further investigation revealed that James had purchased a handgun just a week before the attack. This new information led detectives to plan a questioning of James and Brenda. The funeral of Rob Andrews was held on November 23rd, but it was notable for the absence of Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt. Their failure to attend the ceremony raised many questions among family and friends, and also sparked concern among the police. It soon became apparent that the missing individuals had fled, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. The police had a breakthrough in the case. They had identified the suspects and received the autopsy results. However, Brenda's account of the attack contradicted the forensic evidence. The police discovered that two different guns were used in the attack, and the injuries sustained by Rob and Brenda differed from the description provided by Brenda. The investigation revealed that the first shot was fired from a shotgun at a distance, but the second shot came from a .22 caliber pistol at close range. The same pistol was used to shoot Brenda's arm. Analysis of the bloodstains on the fabric showed that the shooter was standing near the victim when the second shot was fired. The angle of the blood matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda was the one who fired the second shot at Rob. Brenda and James were officially named suspects and a warrant was issued for their arrest. However, they had a substantial lead and had already gone into hiding. The police notified border officials to be on the lookout for them, but they had vanished. It eventually became clear that James and Brenda had fled to another country, with Mexico being the suspected destination. To capture the fugitives, the authorities froze their bank accounts, assuming that without access to their funds, they would eventually surface. This strategy proved effective, and 3 months later, James reached out to his daughter, Joanna, requesting that she send him money. Unbeknownst to James, Joanna was secretly working with the investigators. Joanna had long suspected her father's involvement in the crime, as he had been secretive and evasive with her. She recalled a previous incident where he had asked her boyfriend to pose as a doctor and call Rob, informing him that his wife was ill. It led them to discover that James and Brenda were secretly staying in Cancun, Mexico. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. During the investigation, neither James nor Brenda cooperated or pleaded guilty. James was the first to stand trial. The prosecution presented a strong case, highlighting James' background as an Army sniper and his experience with firearms. The court also heard about James' affair with Brenda and his attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from removing Brenda as a beneficiary. The jury considered the testimony of James' daughter and physical evidence found at the scene. James was found guilty and sentenced to death. Brenda's trial followed, but it was more dramatic and revealing than James. The prosecution focused on Brenda's personality and history of infidelity, calling her former lovers to testify. They portrayed her as someone lacking in faith and integrity. When the prosecutor questioned Brenda about her husband's murder, she claimed to be innocent and asked to be set free, citing her faith. However, the prosecutor presented a different image of Brenda, portraying her as a woman who didn't love her husband, cheated on him, and killed him for selfish reasons. To support his argument, the prosecutor showed the contents of a suitcase Brenda had taken to Mexico, which included lingerie and a book about seduction techniques. He questioned whether a grieving widow would flee her husband's funeral. In contrast, the defense team attempted to depict Brenda as a victim of the events that transpired. The defense attorney pointed out that Brenda was also injured during the attack, but forensic experts concluded that she had shot herself in the arm. The defense then produced a letter allegedly written by James, confessing to the crimes. However, handwriting analysis revealed that the document was actually forged by Brenda Andrew herself. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Brenda Andrew was sentenced to death. Despite Brenda's repeated appeals, her conviction has been upheld. The crimes committed by Brenda and James are extremely disturbing. What makes their case even more troubling is that they presented themselves as devout and moral individuals who taught children right from wrong. This hypocrisy raises serious concerns, as people who preach one thing but do not practice it in their own lives can be unpredictable and devoid of empathy. The case of Nathan Pete. Nathan Pete was born on February 12, 1982, in Tamuning, a village on the island of Guam, in the Pacific Ocean. Nathan was part of a big, loving family with 3 brothers, Matthew, Anthony, and Eric, and a sister named Carmela. His family was close-knit, with all the children being helpful and supportive of their parents. Nathan was an exemplary child who rarely got into trouble, demonstrating care and kindness at home and being diligent in his studies at school. His sociable nature made him easy to get along with, and he had many friends. Nathan grew up near the ocean and developed a passion for swimming and surfing from a young age. He spent most of his free time at the beach, soaking up the sun and enjoying life. It was during his time at South High School that he met his future wife, Michelle and Chuck. They were immediately drawn to each other and began spending all their time together, studying, preparing for classes, and helping with household chores. As they grew closer, their friendship blossomed into romance. Tragedy struck Michelle's family when she was 16, as her mother passed away. Michelle took on a maternal role, caring for her younger sister Melissa and managing the household. Nathan was supportive and helpful throughout this difficult time, assisting with childcare and other responsibilities. After graduating in 2000, Nathan proposed to Michelle, and she happily accepted. Due to financial constraints, they decided to forego a traditional wedding and instead moved in together with the blessing of their parents to start building a life together. Nathan got a job as a receptionist at a local hotel, earning a decent income. Like many young people, he and his partner Michelle were ambitious and had big plans for their future. They wanted their own home and independence. When their son Dion was born, Nathan's income was no longer enough to cover their expenses. To provide a better life for his family, Nathan decided to join the Air Force. After completing his training, Nathan was assigned to Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage, Alaska. Although Michelle was left to care for their baby alone, the family's financial situation improved. Eventually, they were able to build their own home, where their second child, a daughter named Niara, was born. Nathan's military career took off, and he was able to provide for his family's needs. 6 years after getting engaged, Nathan and Michelle finally had a big wedding, achieving their long-held dreams. In 2006, Nathan was transferred to the Davis Monthan military base in Arizona. where he was promoted to lead a team responsible for loading weapons onto a 10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft. He also received training in logistics and material management. Nathan was dedicated to his job and performed it with the best intentions, truly serving his country. A coworker described Nathan as a hard worker. In 2007, Nathan and his family relocated to Nellis Air Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. There, he took on a new role as a junior officer in charge of the supply section for combat aircraft maintenance. As Nathan's career grew, so did his family. He and his wife, Michelle, had 2 more sons, Drawn and David. Because Michelle fell in love with Las Vegas, and Nathan wanted to make her happy, so he chose a house in Las Vegas that's spacious and bright, house perfect for their large family. Initially, Michelle was overjoyed with the surprise, but as time passed, their expenses began to exceed Nathan's earnings, causing their financial happiness to dwindle. Financial struggles strained Nathan and Michelle's relationship. To improve their situation, Nathan enlisted in the military, despite the U.S. being at war with Iraq. His 6-month deployment led to significant financial improvements, bringing him a sense of satisfaction. After a brief rest, Pete returned to Iraq, leaving Michelle to care for their 4 children. The weight of this responsibility, combined with Nathan's prolonged absences, took a toll on Michelle's mental health. She became anxious about being alone and struggled to cope with a reduced standard of living. To alleviate her worries, Michelle started working at a corporate credit card telemarketing firm and attended an aesthetics school to develop her skills. However, when Nathan left for Iraq again, Michelle felt isolated and disenchanted. Her relationship with Nathan was strained, and she turned to a colleague, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez, a charismatic but untrustworthy individual with a questionable past. By the end of 2009, Nathan returned home, and it seemed that the time apart had affected his family relationships. Michelle had been leading a double life, and her intentions were not entirely pure. She had developed feelings for someone else, but she didn't want to lose her husband. To keep him, she tried to please him in every way, changing her appearance and behavior. Nathan was fascinated by the changes in Michelle, but he didn't suspect that something was amiss. He was happy to be back with his family and decided to stay for a while. The children had struggled in school without their father, and Nathan was determined to make up for lost time. To earn extra money, Nathan started working night shifts in Las Vegas and also began teaching baseball to young children privately. He developed a simplified training program that was well received. However, as the family's standard of living declined, Michelle's attitude towards Nathan changed. By Thanksgiving 2010, the tension was palpable. When Nathan's brother Eric and his wife Veronica visited, they were shocked by the change in they, sensing the strain between Nathan and Michelle. It appeared that Michelle and Nathan's feelings for each other had diminished significantly. They was having trouble concealing their personal and financial struggles from others. In fact, their pantry and refrigerator were nearly bare. A conversation between Michelle and Michael occurred on December 1st, 2010, in a sequence of events that seemed unusual. At 11:12 p.m., Michael sent Michelle a text message, inquiring about her well-being and mentioning that they were nearing completion of the Van Dyke contract, which was due the following day. 2 minutes later, Michael sent a follow-up message, offering Michelle a chance to take a couple of days off to rest if she was still not feeling well. He emphasized that her contributions were highly valued. Michelle responded to Michael's messages at 11:19 p.m. She mentioned that her husband had just awakened her, informing her that he would be late that day, although she was unsure about the specifics. A few months before the tragedy, Michelle was not hesitant to leave her husband Nathan. She believed that a divorce would only lead to financial struggles and emotional distress. She also doubted that Nathan would forgive her and provide sufficient alimony to support a normal life. However, Michelle was aware of Nathan's military insurance policy, which would pay out approximately $650,000 in the event of his death. This thing weighed heavily on her mind. Michelle shared her troubled thoughts with Michael, who was intrigued. They hatched a sinister plan to kill Nathan, with Michael invited Corey, a friend with a history of theft and fraud, for a $20,000 reward. Corey's girlfriend Jessica and her friend Shannon joined in, with Shannon promised a 5% profit. The original plan was to kill Nathan in a parking lot. Jessica bought supplies, including gloves and cologne. Shannon provided an alibi for Michael. However, Michelle's early return home on December 1st, 2010, changed the plan. She usually arrived home around 10:40 p.m., but came home early and spent the evening with Nathan, unaware of the tragic events that would soon unfold. Nathan was running late for work, so he rushed downstairs just as Michelle was communicating with Michael. To avoid arousing suspicion, Michelle used coded messages. Unbeknownst to Nathan, Michael was parked in a black Cadillac SRX in front of the house, wearing latex gloves to prevent leaving any evidence. Michael realized that Nathan's military training made him a formidable opponent, so he decided to take him by surprise. Approaching Nathan from behind, Michael shot him 5 times in the back. He quickly escaped in his car and drove away. After the crime, Michael and Shannon went to a hotel to create an alibi. Meanwhile, Jessica thoroughly cleaned their apartment to remove any incriminating evidence. The perpetrators then disposed of their clothes by burning them in a fireplace. Later, police officers arrived at the scene and were shocked by what they found. In a neighborhood considered one of the safest, Detective Todd Williams began investigating the crime scene. He found the garage door unlocked, with a strong smell of iron inside. Blood was splattered on the walls, car, and floor. Nathan's uniform, keys, and wallet were still intact, with no valuables missing. Given the lack of missing valuables, the police ruled out robbery as a motive for the murder. Detective Laurie Anderson spoke with Michelle, the victim's wife, after examining the scene. Michelle mentioned the family's financial struggles, sparking ideas for the police. They wondered if Nathan was hiding something, such as a gambling addiction or affair, which could have motivated the attack. The evidence suggested Nathan was deliberately targeted. The police examined the victim's cell phone and found only pictures of his wife and children, which led them to believe that Pete was a decent man. The investigation continued, and the next step was to canvass the neighborhood. As some neighbors reported seeing a car parked near the pet house, driven by a man wearing a brown sweatshirt, which quickly drove away after shots were fired. This gave detectives their first lead. Nathan's family was shocked to learn of his death and immediately flew to Guam to get answers. His mother, Carmelita Pett, was devastated and cried the whole way. When they arrived at the victim's home, Michelle, Nathan's wife, threw herself into her mother-in-law's arms and then lost consciousness. However, Nathan's mother sensed that her daughter-in-law's reaction seemed unnatural and possibly fake. The investigators decided to question Michelle again and asked her about the car witnesses had seen. Unexpectedly, she mentioned that her colleague, Michael Rodriguez, had a similar car. It's unclear why Michelle revealed this information, but it helped the police piece together the puzzle. It was later determined that Michelle had inadvertently revealed the truth, or perhaps the perpetrator's plan was flawed from the start. Detectives investigated Michael's identity and discovered he had a criminal record, which raised suspicions. They brought him in for questioning, and he responded calmly. According to Michael, on the day of Nathan's murder, he went shopping at a supermarket around 9 p.m. and met a woman named Shannon. They had a long conversation and decided to continue their acquaintance in a hotel room. Michael claimed they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. To verify Michael's alibi, the officers contacted Shannon, who confirmed their romantic encounter. However, the detective had doubts, so they decided to examine Michelle's phone records. Specialists recovered the correspondence between Michelle and Michael, which showed they had been communicating for a year. Their conversation on the day of Nathan's murder seemed suspicious, as they discussed a contract with someone named Van DJK in a cryptic manner, suggesting they might have been planning the crime. Michael was released for lack of evidence, but detectives re-questioned Michelle after analyzing her phone. She became agitated and hid something. As investigators pushed for more information, Michelle confessed to planning Nathan's murder with Michael, her lover, for insurance payouts. However, messages revealed her guilt, including a smile emoticon after Nathan's death. Meanwhile, Shannon told police that Michael's account of the attack was truthful. She admitted that she originally cooperated with him, but later surrendered to the police when she felt exploited and feared for her own safety. Hotel security footage supports her claim, revealing that Michael and Shannon arrived at the hotel at 11:40 p.m., which disputes Michael's initial statement that they arrived at 11 p.m. Detectives discovered Corey's involvement in the case after a key witness came forward. Although Corey had consistently denied any involvement, Jessica eventually revealed her role in the sinister plan. Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, Jessica Austin, and Michelle were arrested on December 8, 2010, and held without bail. Due to concerns about her mental health, Michelle was placed under surveillance to prevent a potential suicide attempt. In Clark County District Court on January 4, 2011, the 4 defendants were formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, as well as murder with a firearm. Michael and Corey faced additional charges of firearm possession. On September 21, 2015, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first to go on trial for the murder of Nathan. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. 1 week later, on September 29, 2015, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. His appeal was later denied. At the time of sentencing, Michael showed no emotion and did not express any regret for his crime. Michelle Pete went on trial in Las Vegas a month later, claiming a change of heart about killing her husband. She tearfully apologized to the victim's parents in court, saying she loved her husband and children and made a terrible mistake, before she fainting. The prosecutor argued that Michelle did not attempt to thwart the conspiracy, despite her claims to the contrary. The evidence presented in court supported this assertion. It was difficult for many to understand how a mother of 4 could become involved in such a heinous crime. The judge ultimately sided with the prosecution, concluding that Michelle was more involved in the crime than she had admitted. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm, which allowed her to avoid the death penalty. The Pete family also requested that the court not impose the death penalty on Michelle. Corey Alexis Hawkins also accepted a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica Austin also took a plea deal with prosecutors and was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. At her final sentencing in March 2016, Michelle again cited her unstable emotional state as a factor in her decision to commit the crime. The Pete family children will likely suffer lifelong trauma, making it hard to form strong bonds. The pain will haunt them, but justice has been served with the 4 responsible individuals facing consequences. The case of Nicole Peets. Nicole Peets was born on February 26, 1973, in King County, Washington. Her parents, who later divorced while Nicole was still in school, had her as their only child together. During her high school years, Nicole was a lively and sociable individual who participated in sports and had a charming personality. She had many friends and enjoyed trips to the countryside, with Lake Sammamish, located east of Seattle, being her favorite vacation spot. She spent her summer vacations there every year. After high school, Nicole attended Western Washington College, where she studied public relations. Alongside her studies, she continued to engage in sports and maintained an excellent physical shape. She decided to turn her passion for sports into a career and landed a job as a trainer at a local sports club. There, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and gained a loyal client base who regularly attended her group classes. At the same time, Nicole pursued higher education in management and eventually secured a job at a major mobile communications company. Outwardly, Nicole appeared to be a friendly and sociable person who was always willing to help others. However, few people realized that she was hiding a great deal of pain and misery behind this facade. As a teenager, Nicole struggled with addiction after her parents got divorced. This event was traumatic for her fragile and still developing psyche, leading her to rebel and seek solace in bad company and alcohol. Unfortunately, this led to a severe addiction that lasted for several years and had a devastating impact on Nicole's physical and mental health. Her mother, Gail, was often away from home due to her demanding job as a flight attendant and didn't notice the warning signs. Nicole lived with her elderly grandmother, who also didn't initially realize that her granddaughter was regularly consuming alcohol. By the time the truth came to light, the damage had already been done. Fortunately, Nicole's mother was there to support her. Gail not only arranged for Nicole to receive therapy but also attended AA meetings with her, helping her to open up and overcome her addiction. By that time, Gail had remarried, and her new partner, Rod, was very supportive of Nicole. He treated her like his own daughter and believed she could overcome her addiction. Nicole took therapy seriously, attending every session, and soon overcame her addiction. However, the effects of alcohol on her health were significant. Nicole developed severe pancreas problems, requiring surgery. More devastatingly, her early alcohol abuse damaged her reproductive system, rendering her unable to have children. After overcoming her addiction in the mid-1990s, Nicole met her future husband, David, at her new job at a sports club. David, a regular at the club, was a tall, handsome young man who was diligent about his fitness routine. He was immediately drawn to Nicole, and she, too, noticed the attractive young man and became interested. Although David was 4 years younger than Nicole, the age difference did not bother them. The relationship between Nicole and David gradually developed into a romantic one, which lasted almost 8 years before they got married in 2002. Their intimate wedding ceremony in Hawaii was attended only by their closest friends and family. After exchanging their vows, they moved to a quiet town called Linwood in Washington State, where they bought a home and began their new life together. Nicole was known for being sociable, friendly, and had a talent for building relationships. She quickly formed close bonds with the neighbors and had a passion for animals, with multiple dogs being part of the family. Because unable to have children of her own, she directed her maternal instincts towards her pets. David and Nicole were viewed as the epitome of a happy married couple with a seemingly perfect relationship that brought them joy. One of Nicole's many hobbies was cooking, and she excelled at it. She delighted her husband and impressed guests with her culinary skills, taking pleasure in sharing meals and company with those she loved. Tragedy struck when Nicole disappeared on the eve of her 33rd birthday in 2006. Nicole failed to report to work and was unreachable by her family throughout the day. Her mother, Gail, tried to contact her but was unsuccessful, prompting her to alert David, Nicole's husband, to see if he knew what was going on. However, David had also been unable to reach Nicole. When questioned, David revealed that he and Nicole had argued the previous day, and when she didn't answer her phone the next day, he assumed she was still upset. He waited until evening to attempt to apologize, only to realize Nicole was still missing. It wasn't until the evening of the second day, when Nicole still hadn't contacted her family and her phone was still unreachable, that the police decided to launch a search. They began by investigating the last known location where Nicole was seen, her home with David. An investigation of the room where Nicole Peets was last seen found no signs of evidence of kidnapping. The absence of her personal car suggested that she might have simply left on her own. The family turned to social media to spread the word and ask for help in finding their daughter. They also immediately flew to Linwood, where they started their own search efforts. They put up posters with her picture and spoke to people who knew her, hoping someone might have information about her whereabouts. The police searched for Nicole and her car, trying to determine the route she took on the day she disappeared. Tragically, the worst fears were confirmed a few days later when a jogger discovered a young woman's body in a local park area. The jogger had taken an unusual route that morning. It was there that he stumbled upon something suspicious in the shrubbery, which turned out to be a brutally mutilated, naked body. The police were immediately notified, and forensic experts suggested that the crime was violent due to the presence of severe blunt force trauma and the lack of clothing. The autopsy revealed extensive bruising, abrasions, and blunt force injuries, indicating that the victim had been severely beaten before her death. The cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation, and it appeared that the killer had used their bare hands. Police initially believed the body they found was that of Nicole Peets, a young woman who had gone missing several days earlier and had been the subject of a citywide search. Her identity was confirmed by her family as Nicole. When Nicole's mother, Gail, saw her daughter's body at the morgue, she was overcome with grief and needed medical attention. Her husband, Rod, was also devastated, but his reaction seemed a bit unusual to some. He didn't seem truly distraught and his emotions seemed forced. However, at that time no one paid much attention to this, because everyone coped with the tragedy in their own way. Police believed the missing car was the primary target of the attack and would hold key evidence. They released a description of the gray Volkswagen Polo to the media, asking for tips. Weeks later, a security guard found the car in a parking lot on the outskirts of the city, noticing it had been parked there for an extended period. The police took the car for a thorough examination, hoping to find evidence and clues that would lead them to the perpetrator and help reconstruct the crime scene. However, their search yielded nothing. The only fingerprints and DNA found in the car belonged to Nicole and her husband, who occasionally drove the vehicle. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the investigators were reluctant to return the car to David. In addition, the victim's lack of clothes raised questions. The numerous injuries suggested a rage-driven attack, possibly a personal vendetta. However, Nicole was known for her kind nature and had no known enemies. The investigation into this complex case was on the verge of going cold, with no new leads or directions to pursue after nearly a year. The lack of witnesses and surveillance cameras in the parking lot where the car was abandoned made it difficult to gather evidence. However, one peculiar detail stood out. The driver's seat was positioned in a way that suggested the person driving the car was significantly taller and larger than the victim. The police obtained footage from the gas station security cameras, but the contents remained unclear. Frustrated by the lack of progress and the fact that the killer was still at large, Nicole's parents took matters into their own hands. They hired a private investigator to gather information and verify their suspicions, and offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who could provide useful information about the case. David, the husband of the victim, initially showed interest in the investigation, but his enthusiasm waned after 6 months. He eventually remarried, having a child with his new wife. This news was devastating for Gail, the victim's mother, as her daughter had been unable to have children, and David had often criticized her for this. Gail repeatedly suggested that David might be the culprit, but many people believed Gail was motivated by resentment. The police seemed to dismiss this theory altogether. However, 6 years after the crime, David was taken into custody as the prime suspect. One unusual circumstance was a gas station security footage that captured a man using Nicole credit card. The footage appeared to show a man resembling David, but he wore a head covering and dark glasses, making a positive identification impossible. Although this recording was not definitive proof, it was still added to the case file. Another discrepancy was the missing wedding ring, which Nicole never removed from her finger. Initially, investigators believed the killer might have taken it, but they found the ring in a box on the dressing table in Nicole's home. During the examination of Nicole's body, experts found a dental mouth guard in her mouth. This device was specifically designed to prevent teeth grinding, a condition known as bruxism, which Nicole experienced during sleep. The mouth guard had been prescribed to her shortly before her death due to her nervousness, which caused involuntary muscle spasms in her jaw. These spasms had led to the erosion of her tooth enamel and chipping of her teeth. The investigation concluded that Nicole was likely killed in her own bed while she was still asleep. This theory was supported by the fact that she was not wearing any clothes and her body was clean, with no signs of a struggle. Additionally, Nicole's face was free of makeup. The mouth guard found at the scene was not a significant factor, as Nicole had only recently started using it. Moreover, forensic experts analyzed the driver's seat in the car and found that the last person to sit behind the wheel had the same physical characteristics as David, Nicole's husband. The car only had fingerprints belonging to David and Nicole, suggesting that no one else had been in the vehicle. A crucial discovery was made possible by advances in technology. The killer had attempted to mislead the investigation by using Nicole's phone in various parts of the city. However, at the same locations and times, David's phone was also active, revealing a suspicious coincidence. Furthermore, it was discovered that David had a motive for the crime, and the seemingly perfect family was actually facing a severe crisis. Nicole was juggling multiple responsibilities, studying, working 2 jobs, and supporting others struggling with addiction. Meanwhile, her husband led a carefree life, unable to hold down a job and spending most of his time in bars and clubs. He would often use Nicole's earnings to fund his nightlife, including affairs with other women. Nicole tried to intervene in her husband's addiction, suggesting AA meetings, but he dismissed her concerns. The situation worsened as David's infidelity was revealed. After Nicole's sudden and mysterious death, David hastily filed for a large insurance payout and began a new relationship. It was later discovered that David had been having an affair with a woman named Jane for several months prior to Nicole's death. While Nicole was working or studying, David would often meet Jane at bars and clubs. Just before Nicole's birthday, David brought Jane to their home, where Nicole unexpectedly walked in on them. This led to a heated argument between Nicole and David. Nicole confided in her mother about the incident just days before she mysteriously vanished. Gail had her suspicions about her son-in-law from the start, but the police claimed they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. As a result, the case was closed, and the family was left in the dark about the investigation. Over time, they lost hope that the person responsible would be held accountable. After his wife's death, David received a significant insurance payout, which he spent on lavish gifts for his mistress, Jane. Gail believed that Jane might have been involved in the crime, but she was only questioned as a witness due to lack of evidence. In 2013, David went to court, still denying any involvement in his wife's death. His lawyers initially argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and not conclusive. However, as the prosecution presented more incriminating evidence, the defense shifted their strategy. They portrayed David as a victim, suggesting that his wife, Nicole, had become unbearable to live with due to her addiction to pain pills and drinking. The claims that Nicole was unstable were unfounded and disputed by everyone who knew her. Even if she had lost control, that would not have justified David's brutal murder of his wife. Ultimately, David's guilt was proven beyond a doubt, and he received the maximum sentence allowed by state law. David was sentenced to 18 years in prison, but he will be eligible for parole in 2025 after serving 2/3 of his sentence. The case of Joseph Saunier. Joseph Saunier was born in 1955 to a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana. From a young age, he aspired to follow in his family's footsteps and become a skilled doctor. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. Joseph then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. While pursuing his university studies, Joseph successfully balanced his academic and professional responsibilities. He took on additional workload at the university and honed his skills through hands-on experience at the hospital. His hard work and dedication did not go unnoticed, and in his final year of training, he was appointed chief resident. After completing his studies, Joseph specialized in pathologic anatomy and went on to become a respected pathologist and laboratory director in Lubbock, Texas. However, his personal life was marked by tragedy, including the loss of she he loved. Joseph's 27-year marriage, which he had considered happy, ended in divorce when his wife fell in love with another man. Despite his own heartache, Joseph accepted her decision and agreed to the divorce, believing that she he loved had found happiness with someone else. Joseph was a man of strong character, nobility, and responsibility. Even after his divorce, he maintained a warm relationship with his ex-wife, Becky, and continued to support their 2 sons. This showed his resilience and strength in the face of adversity. When Becky tragically died at the hands of her new husband 2 years later, Joseph was shocked. He often thought back to their family years and mourned the loss. However, he remained a source of strength for his family. He took care of all the organizational and funeral expenses and helped his sons cope with the trauma. The tragedy had a profound effect on Joseph, who initially coped by immersing himself in his work and raising his sons. Later, he chose to start fresh in a new city with a new partner, relocating from Dallas to Lubbock, Texas in 2007. There, he took on the role of chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Joseph sought a new hobby and enrolled in a local dance studio. The classes not only brought him joy but also provided opportunities to meet new people, including women. One warm summer evening, Michelle Tina walked into the dance class, and Joseph was immediately captivated. Michelle, with her elegance, great sense of humor, and sparkling eyes, lit up the room. Joseph, 57, knew right away that she was someone special. Michelle, 47, was equally taken with Joseph. She admired his confidence, respectful demeanor, and smooth dance moves. As they paired up to dance, they discovered a perfect harmony. Joseph and Michelle's connection deepened over time. He asked her to start a romantic relationship, and she accepted. Michelle had a captivating presence that inspired Joseph to make significant life changes. Leaving Amarillo, Joseph's new lover, Michelle, was escaping the fear and anxiety caused by her involvement with Thomas Dixon, a married plastic surgeon and owner of a private clinic. Their relationship began in 2008 when Michelle visited Thomas's clinic for Botox injections, initially starting as a friendly interaction that progressed into a romance. As a successful and independent woman, Michelle had built a career as an NFL executive and raised 4 grown children. She was free from obligations and didn't need anything from anyone. In contrast, Thomas was trapped in a 20-year marriage and began leading a double life to be with Michelle. When Thomas's wife discovered the affair, she filed for divorce, ending their 2-decade-long marriage. Thomas was so consumed by his infatuation with Michelle that he barely noticed the significant change in his life. He separated from his wife to be with Michelle, who had never expressed a desire to marry him. Thomas tried to get Michelle's attention, but his pressure tactics only scared her away. She realized he was manipulative and controlling, so she ended their relationship in 2010. Despite the breakup, Thomas continued to pursue Michelle. Thomas' obsession became overwhelming, causing Michelle to move away to escape his influence. She settled in Lubbock, where she met Joseph Saunier and started a new life. They quickly hit it off, and their relationship blossomed into true love. Joseph's family and friends welcomed Michelle with open arms, and he showered her with gifts and attention. He took her on trips, to fine restaurants, and to exclusive clubs. When Joseph realized he had found the one, he proposed to her in Los Angeles, surrounded by his entire family. At that moment, 47-year-old Michelle was deeply infatuated with her new partner, Joseph. Her social media was filled with daily declarations of love for him. As a result, her former lover, Thomas Dixon, became aware of her new relationship and was emotionally shaken to learn that Michelle had moved on and was planning to marry Joseph. Thomas realized he couldn't win Michelle back but still proposed rekindling their past romance, suggesting they become lovers again. However, Michelle firmly rejected his proposal and informed Joseph about the situation. As time passed, Michelle and Joseph began to feel like they were being watched. They even caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a camera flash through their backyard window, but initially didn't think much of it, underestimating the severity of the situation. Things took a turn for the worse on July 11, 2012. A landscaper arrived at Joseph's home to discuss a remodeling project and was unable to reach Joseph. When he found an open door, he cautiously entered the house, finding it in disarray with a bullet hole near the entrance, suggesting a possible intruder. Upon searching the premises, the landscaper discovered the body of Joseph Saunier in the garage. Joseph had multiple stab and gunshot wounds. Believing the perpetrator might still be in the area, the landscaper left the house and called for emergency assistance. At 2:48 p.m., police received the call and immediately sent several patrol cars to the scene. Responding officers confirmed the identity of Joseph. A bottle with a hole shot through the bottom was discovered at the scene, suggesting that it had been used as a makeshift silencer for a gun. A forensic team was called in to collect evidence, which included the bottle and blood samples. The perpetrator seemed to have been careless, leaving behind a significant amount of evidence. The DNA from the bottle and blood samples were sent to a lab for analysis. Neighbors who were interviewed by detectives reported that they didn't see or hear anything suspicious. Unfortunately, there were no nearby CCTV cameras to capture the incident. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered the house through a large window overlooking the backyard, which made the attack unexpected. The attacker confronted Joseph in the dining room and shot him. The wine bottle was likely used as a makeshift silencer at this point. Despite being shot, Joseph was still alive and made his way to the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed him multiple times. The autopsy revealed that Joseph had suffered 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The evidence suggested that the murder was not a random act, but the killer's identity and motive remained unknown. The investigation focused on Joseph's close friends and family. Michelle reported that she and Joseph had experienced strange occurrences in the months leading up to the murder. She believed that Joseph was being stalked and had seen a suspicious person lurking around his house. Joseph had also received persistent and unsettling phone calls and texts in the days before his death. Officers verified the information, but they suspected that the calls and messages were from other women Joseph was involved with. Since witnesses reported that Joseph was in contact with multiple women at the same time, investigators asked Michelle if she knew about these other women. Michelle claimed she was unaware of them. Joseph's sons defended their father, stating that he would never cheat, as it was not in his character. However, investigators continue to explore the possibility of a crime motivated by jealousy. During the next interrogation, Michelle cracked under the pressure, broke down in tears, and admitted that she knew several women who might be involved in the crime. Michelle revealed that several of Joseph's former girlfriends were constantly harassing him. Although he ignored them, they continued to express their disapproval of his upcoming wedding to Michelle. One of these women was a persistent caller and writer from Florida. Another was a nurse and colleague of Joseph, who regularly contacted Joseph. During this interview, Michelle mentioned Thomas Dixon. Until then, Michelle had not linked Thomas to the murder, as he had seemingly moved on with his life after she ended their affair. The police considered Thomas a viable suspect and decided to question him. Thomas willingly talked to the detectives. He admitted to being deeply in love with a woman named Michelle and revealed that he had divorced his wife for her. However, Michelle had refused to be with him, and Thomas eventually gave up and started a relationship with a younger woman. Thomas's new girlfriend, a medical student, provided a solid alibi for him, confirming he was at work and with her at the time of the crime. All suspects, including Michelle, had unshakable alibis. The detectives attempted to identify potential enemies of Joseph or individuals who stood to gain financially from his death, but no new leads emerged. When the lab results arrived, the case seemed to be at a standstill. Unfortunately, the forensic analysis did not provide any clarity. Although the DNA sample from the bottle did not match Joseph, the police database was unable to identify the owner of the DNA found at the crime scene. In a surprising turn of events, the police received a call from Paul Reynolds. He claimed that his roommate, David Shepard, had recently confessed to committing a murder in Lubbock. According to Paul, Shepard had attempted to take his own life after the crime but was rescued. Paul shared information with the police that Shepard had told him about the crime. Shepard seemed to have knowledge that only a few detectives knew, including the use of a bottle muffler. This new information led the officers to believe that Shepard was indeed involved in the crime. Another witness came forward, naming Shepard as the killer. Shepard was said to have been given instructions by a plastic surgeon. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered Shepard had a history of violence and multiple theft convictions. At that time, he was unemployed and recently divorced. When Shepard was brought in for questioning, he quickly began to confess. He confirmed that Thomas Dixon, the plastic surgeon, had hired him to commit the crime. According to Shepard, he had met Thomas at a bar where both were drinking away their recent breakups. Over time, their casual conversation turned into a real friendship, which eventually led to the crime. Thomas Dixon shared a sad tale of lost love, lamenting the fact that his ex-partner Michelle had left him for someone else and was now planning to get married. Unable to move on, Thomas confided in his friend Shepard about his desperation to win Michelle back. Together, they concocted a plan, but according to Shepard, it didn't initially involve murder. Their goal was to tarnish the reputation of Michelle's fiancé, Joseph, so that she would leave him and return to Thomas. To accomplish this goal, Thomas and Shepard hired women to pretend to be Joseph's mistresses for $1,000 each. These women were instructed to seduce Joseph, and a series of events was staged to create the impression that Joseph had fathered a child with one of them and then abandoned her. Despite these efforts, Joseph denied the allegations, and Michelle believed his denials. Initially, they suspected they were being stalked due to some suspicious activity, but it was later revealed that the activity was just Shepard visiting their house that night. He used his phone's flashlight to create the illusion that they were being watched. After their initial tactics failed to cause tension in their relationship, Thomas devised a more extreme plan. He offered Shepard 3 silver bars, valued at around $110,000, to kill the pathologist. Shepard accepted the offer, and as an act of good faith, Thomas gave him one of the silver bars. Shepard then sold the bar to a pawn shop. David Shepard reported that when he arrived at Joseph's house, events escalated out of control, resulting in an unintentional shooting. Shepard claimed he was in shock and shouted to check on Sonia when he didn't respond. He followed Sonia into the garage, where he found him lying flat, and upon checking, discovered he had no pulse. Shepard confessed to stabbing Joseph Sonnier multiple times in an attempt to cover up what he described as involuntary manslaughter. He admitted to having the opportunity to call for emergency help but chose not to. After the stabbing, he mutilated the remains, took the rest of the bullion, and later attempted to take his own life. Shepard maintained that he initially agreed to participate in a crime without fully understanding what it entailed. When confronted with the reality of killing Joseph, he realized he was incapable of doing so. However, an accidental gunshot led to Sonnier's death. Shepard was arrested the same day on charges of first-degree murder, supported by his testimony and substantial evidence, including incriminating phone calls and text messages. At the initial interview, detectives tried to get Thomas Dixon to confess, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer, leading to a lawsuit. Meanwhile, David Shepard pleaded guilty to his role in the crime and waived his right to appeal, as part of a deal with the prosecutor. He was sentenced to life without parole instead of facing the death penalty. Thomas Dixon, who only had circumstantial evidence against him, pleaded not guilty. However, during the trial, key witness David Shepard unexpectedly testified that he committed the crime alone and that Dixon was not involved. Shepard claimed under oath that the silver bars were meant to invest in a business they were planning to start together. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a retrial. In 2016, the second trial took place, and Dixon was found guilty of first-degree murder, receiving a life sentence without parole. His lawyers appealed the decision, and the judgment was reversed. Dixon was released on $2 million bail, but the case wasn't over. The prosecutor's office sought to have the original sentence reinstated by the state's highest criminal court, and if that failed, a third trial would be held. The prosecutor's office filed a motion on February 11, 2019, which was granted in April 2020. As a result, the bail was revoked, and an arrest warrant was reissued. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals later overturned the lower court's decision, upholding Thomas Dixon's original sentence. The judge ordered that Dixon must continue serving his life sentence without parole. He is currently imprisoned in La Mesa, Texas.